Hey guys, tonight we're time traveling back to one of the most bustling and, honestly, kind of grimy places in ancient history, the city of Babylon. It's loud, it's chaotic, and if you don't step carefully, you might end up ankle-deep in something that definitely isn't mud. You're about to spend a full day surviving the heat, dust, and sheer inconvenience of life in one of humanity's earliest urban jungles. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe cover with blanket for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up on a straw-stuffed mat, your face buried in a woven reed pillow that smells vaguely of mildew and yesterday's goat. The ceiling, mud-plastered and low, is already radiating morning heat. Outside, roosters are screaming like they invented noise. Your room is the size of a generous broom closet. It doubles as your bedroom, storage area, and, on bad days, sick goat shelter. You sit up, careful not to knock your head on the wooden beams. The floor beneath you is hard-packed clay, still cool from the night but already warming beneath your bare feet. You stretch your arms and immediately regret it. Your back cracks like a dried fig. You're not even 30, but in Babylon, you're basically middle-aged. Outside, the sun hasn't yet cleared the rooftops, but the alleys are already stirring. Someone's yelling about a missing sandal, a baby's crying 2 houses over. A donkey loudly regrets whatever choices brought it into this world. You live near the Ishtar Gate, which sounds fancy, but don't get too excited. The closer you are to the iconic monuments, the more you're reminded that they were built for people who don't live where the garbage piles up. Still, when you step out of your little mud brick house, you catch a sliver of the ziggurat far in the distance, rising like a tiered wedding cake of sun-baked ambition. Your tunic is wrinkled, your hair's sticking up like ancient bed straw, and you haven't even made it to breakfast yet. A neighbor passes by and nods, then casually spits in the street. Ah, Babylonian manners. Your mother, or maybe your wife, depending on what era of stress you're living in, has left a bowl of barley porridge and a cup of beer water. And yes, beer for breakfast is entirely normal here. It's weak, cloudy, and tastes a little like sadness, but at least it's hydrating. Mostly. As you slurp the barley mush, a fat fly makes a lazy dive bomb at your face. You swat, miss, and mutter something about the gods having a weird sense of humor. Historians still argue whether ancient Babylonians used fly-repelling oils or just learned to live with constant buzzing. Judging by your forehead welts, it's the latter. Outside, the streets are narrow and already alive. Merchants dragging carts of onions and garlic yell over each other. A priestess in clean white linen floats past like she belongs in another dimension. And you, still sticky-eyed and covered in hay fuzz, just try not to trip over the neighbor's goat who has decided that your doorstep is an excellent bathroom. Your sandals are rough, woven from reeds and leather straps that never quite fit right. You shuffle toward your daily duties, which at this moment are unclear. You were supposed to help with grain delivery, but you heard the tax scribes are on a warpath today. Best to keep your route flexible. On your way, you pass the outer wall of your home, a lumpy construction of sun-dried bricks. Each one was shaped by hand and dried in the open air. If you're unlucky, you'll have to patch a few later this week when the rain or a neighbor's angry son takes a corner off. Your walls are strong-ish, but Babylon isn't known for perfect engineering. In fact, remember those famously thick Babylonian walls that supposedly kept enemies out? Historians still argue whether they were as tall and invincible as later stories claimed, or just, well, decently above average. The scent of burning barley hits you hard. Someone's overcooked their beer mash, again. It's not a terrible smell, earthy, almost like toasted cereal, but after the 5th day in a row, it's not exactly appetizing either. You wrinkle your nose and move on, dodging a boy carrying a clay pot twice his size. He doesn't see you. You do the polite thing and jump sideways into a stack of reeds. A moment later, you're brushing grass off your tunic and wondering why your ancestors thought this was the pinnacle of civilization. Then you remember running water, writing, organized religion, actual cities. Compared to wandering in the desert, this is progress. Sweaty, smelly,
You shuffle forward with the subtle grace of someone trying not to tear their only decent tunic. The sun's lifting higher now, casting sharp shadows between the narrow alleys. The bricks underfoot are already warming like stovetops. You pass a woman yelling at her husband for burning the flatbread, again, and a toddler enthusiastically chasing a chicken like it owes him money. The smell of burnt barley gives way to something even more pungent. Charred bread crusts mixed with the faint scent of old fish. Breakfast, Babylon style. You reach the communal oven down the street, where a few women are baking unleavened bread by slapping discs of dough onto the inner wall of a dome-shaped clay oven. One of them waves at you with the enthusiasm of someone who might still have flour in her hair from last week. "You want burnt or extra burnt?" she asks. You point to the one that looks least like it fought a small fire and lost. It's warm and crackly, and when you bite down, it scrapes the roof of your mouth in a way that says, "Congratulations, you'll be chewing this until lunch." A clay cup of barley beer is handed your way, lukewarm and thick enough to require effort. It's what passes for hydration around here, and it's safer than the water, unless you enjoy intestinal mystery tours. You take a sip. It tastes like sour oatmeal and wet straw. Delicious. As you lean against a sun-bleached wall to enjoy your crunchy, jaw-testing breakfast, a goat bleats directly behind you. You turn just in time to see it relieve itself next to your foot. There's a brief, meditative moment where you think, maybe it's the goat's world, and I just live in it. Around you, the city is now fully awake. Workers haul sacks of grain, scribes argue over inventory tallies, and someone, somewhere, is already playing that cursed reed flute again. The city is a symphony of complaints and clattering sandals. You head toward the main lane, stepping carefully around little piles of discarded food, pottery shards, and what you sincerely hope is just mud. Two boys run past you, giggling, covered in something dark and sticky. You don't ask. It's safer that way. A man hawks some sort of breakfast stew near a clay basin that might have once been a hand-washing station. He gestures to a bubbling pot. "Best lentil and sheep you'll taste all week," he proclaims. You look in. It's beige, vaguely gelatinous, and smells like it's been through several culinary lifetimes. You shake your head. He shrugs and yells at the next passerby. Mainstream fact time. Babylonian cuisine actually had some range. There were over 800 recorded recipes, many using ingredients like dates, garlic, onions, lamb, and spices from trade. But the average citizen? You're working with lentils, bread, and fermented everything. Maybe some dried fish if you're lucky, or unlucky, depending on how long it's been drying. You make your way toward the communal courtyard, where residents are gathering for daily chatter, errands, and, unfortunately, complaints. An old man waves you over. "You seen the priest's goat?" he asks. You shake your head. "Good," he replies. "Last time it got loose, it ate half the laundry." There's talk of someone's roof caving in last night during a very brief but enthusiastic rain. Babylon isn't big on weatherproofing. People use whatever's available, reeds, palmwood, mud plaster, and just hope the gods are in a good mood. You finish your bread while seated on the edge of a dusty well, watching two teenagers argue over who's supposed to fetch more clay for repairs. One of them tries to claim it's his day of rest, which earns a laugh from everyone nearby. Rest is for the rich or the dead, preferably both. An older woman hands you a small fig in exchange for moving her pot cart 10 paces. You eat it slowly, savoring the sweetness, seeds and all. A rare treat. You wonder if this is what luxury feels like. Probably not, but close enough. Then the smell hits you again. Burnt barley. Another batch scorched. Someone forgot the timing. You glance toward the oven where black smoke is now rising. The baker swears loudly, hurling a paddle to the ground. Everyone flinches.
It's a good moment to point out a fringe tidbit. Some Babylonian recipes actually called for burned edges. Apparently, charred flavor was a thing. Whether it was a culinary preference or a polite way to salvage mistakes is still up for scholarly debate. Either way, today's breakfast fits the theme.
As you wander toward your next task, still unclear, still mildly dreading it, you pass a mural in progress. Two workers are plastering colored bricks into a lion's mane. The artistry is amazing, but both of them look like they've been inhaling dust since sunrise. One sneezes so hard his trowel falls into a bucket. The smell of incense wafts from a nearby shrine. You pause just long enough to nod at the statue of Ishtar, radiant in blue glazed tile and gold flake. A woman nearby whispers a prayer for her sister's fertility. Another offers a piece of flatbread and murmurs something about her husband behaving oddly near the brothel district. Typical morning devotional fare. The street widens slightly near a tax office, where clay tablets are stacked like depressing little gravestones. A clerk yells at a man for missing grain quotas. "I gave you 10 bushels last moon," the man protests. The clerk shrugs, "Then give 11 now." Historians still argue whether Babylon's bureaucracy was efficient or just loud. Based on what you're seeing, it's definitely the latter. The sun's higher now, baking the earth into cracked tiles. You wipe your brow and blink at the heat shimmer. A bird, some kind of desert sparrow, flits past your ear like it's in a hurry to be somewhere less sweaty. You think about heading to the ziggurat, or maybe avoiding it entirely. Word is they're holding an inspection, and you're not wearing your presentation tunic, whatever that means. Instead, you drift back toward your home, weaving through a crowd arguing about barley prices. You make it 5 steps before a small child tries to sell you a magic pebble. You buy it. It's warm and utterly unmagical. Still, it's yours now. Another goat bleats. You check your sandals. Still intact. Barely. And so continues the average morning in ancient Babylon. Burnt bread, sour beer, unsolicited goat encounters, and an economy that functions mostly on shouting. The sun is now officially declaring war on your forehead. Its rays hammer down as you slink between patches of shadow, trying to stay cool without looking like you're desperately dodging heat stroke. Every brick surface reflects the sunlight back at you like a slow-cooked insult. Welcome to midday Babylon, where even the flies seem too exhausted to buzz properly. You pass a line of workers hauling clay bricks, their backs bent, their tunics soaked through with sweat. A taskmaster watches them with the expression of someone who hasn't smiled since last harvest. One poor soul stumbles, sending a brick tumbling. The taskmaster growls something creative and extremely non-PG, then waves for the line to keep moving. You pretend you didn't see it and veer right, toward the shade of a merchant's awning. The man seated there is surrounded by baskets, dates, onions, garlic, dried herbs, and something that might be dried lizard. He eyes you and says, "Looking for love potion or rat poison?" You blink. "One is cheaper," he adds, grinning. You decline both and instead buy a handful of dried dates, sticky and sun-warmed. You chew slowly, letting the sugars hit your bloodstream like a polite apology for everything else that's happening today. A date pit lodges between your teeth. You consider just letting it stay there. Another goat bleats. You check your sandals. Still intact. Barely. And so continues the average morning in ancient Babylon. Burnt bread, sour beer, unsolicited goat encounters, and an economy that functions mostly on shouting. The sun is now officially declaring war on your forehead. Its rays hammer down as you slink between patches of shadow, trying to stay cool without looking like you're desperately dodging heat stroke. Every brick surface reflects the sunlight back at you like a slow-cooked insult. Welcome to midday Babylon, where even the flies seem too exhausted to buzz properly. You pass a line of workers hauling clay bricks, their backs bent, their tunics soaked through with sweat. A taskmaster watches them with the expression of someone who hasn't smiled since last harvest. One poor soul stumbles, sending a brick tumbling. The taskmaster growls something creative and extremely non-PG, then waves for the line to keep moving.
You pretend you didn't see it and veer right, toward the shade of a merchant's awning. The man seated there is surrounded by baskets, dates, onions, garlic, dried herbs, and something that might be dried lizard. He eyes you and says, "Looking for love potion or rat poison?" You blink. "One is cheaper," he adds, grinning. You decline both and instead buy a handful of dried dates, sticky and sun-warmed. You chew slowly, letting the sugars hit your bloodstream like a polite apology for everything else that's happening today. A date pit lodges between your teeth. You consider just letting it stay there. Down the next lane, the stone walkway opens into a wider square. You're in the artisan quarter now. Here, clay pots stack like inverted.
The smell of wet clay mingles with roasting chickpeas from a vendor nearby. You detour for a handful, tossing them into your mouth with reckless speed. Hot, too hot. You do a subtle, tortured chewing dance, pretending everything's fine while internally screaming. A priest in crisp white linen glides past, escorted by 2 guards. People part like reeds in the wind. He doesn't look left or right, just onward, eyes fixed on some unknowable destination, probably involving incense, sacrifices, or supervising scribes trying not to spill ink on divine inventory scrolls. You remember that temple duties rotate between religious observation and something called ritual cleanliness, which includes frequent bathings in sacred water that smells suspiciously like regular canal water. A quirky tidbit, priests sometimes had to shave their entire bodies to remain pure. Imagine the amount of reed razors involved in that project. You slip into the shade of a semi-collapsed awning where 2 musicians play, badly. One is drumming on a hollowed gourd, the other is blowing something between a flute and a dying duck. You offer a single copper coin, not out of appreciation but as a polite bribe to stop. They thank you and take a break. You're a local hero now. By this time, sweat has permanently glued your tunic to your back. You could wring it out and water a garden. The sky overhead is that hazy, pale blue that promises no clouds, no relief, just more of the same. You're beginning to suspect the gods invented sunstroke as a cosmic joke. You duck into a small courtyard shared by several families. A narrow canal cuts through the edge, carrying water that is, technically, moving. A woman is scrubbing dishes while 3 boys try to float palm bark boats nearby. You take a seat on a shaded bench, letting your limbs go slack like boiled reeds. Someone passes around a small clay jug of cool water mixed with tamarind and date syrup. You sip it gratefully. It tastes earthy, sweet, and slightly gritty. Still, better than warm beer. A toddler offers you a crust of bread, then takes it back, changes her mind, and gives you a rock instead. You thank her solemnly. One of the older boys announces that he's building a model ziggurat. His brother says it looks more like a termite mound. They begin slapping each other with wet palm fronds. You quietly get up before you're drafted into the construction crew. A few streets over, a butcher's stall assaults your nose. The meat is fresh, sort of, and hung on wooden hooks that spin lazily in the breeze. Flies cover every surface like it's a spa weekend. You catch a glimpse of something that might be goat or might be very unlucky dog. You decide you're not hungry after all. You double back toward the smaller canal district, passing graffiti scratched into clay walls. Mostly crude drawings, a few surprisingly artistic lions, and one phrase that reads, "Uruk girls best." Ah, ancient romance. There's talk of a new law being issued soon, something about canal maintenance or temple funding or restricting goat access to public plazas. The city's laws are famously detailed, thanks to good old Hammurabi. You remember one that says if a builder's house collapses and kills someone, the builder's own child gets executed. Harsh? Yes. Effective? Debatable. Historians still argue whether these laws were widely enforced or more symbolic fear tactics. You pause near the canal where a fisherman is throwing nets. He pulls up something slimy and vaguely fish-shaped. It flops once, then dies of embarrassment. He grins and says, "Dinner for 6." You wave, unsure if that's a threat or a boast. Back home is starting to sound like a good idea.
The sun is a little lower now, casting bronze light on everything, like the city's been dipped in honey and regret. You begin the walk back through the alleys, past tired faces, dripping jugs, and someone yelling about missing sandals again. Probably the same guy as this morning. Your feet ache, your head buzzes, and your only companion is a pebble some kid swore was magical. But hey, you're still upright, still mostly clean, and haven't been fined by a tax scribe. That's not nothing.
The shadows are starting to stretch now, long fingers creeping across the clay streets as the sun reluctantly begins its descent. The city doesn't slow down yet. Babylon may be ancient, but it knows how to fill every hour with something just short of chaos. You meander down a path packed with people who are visibly more sun-weary than they were an hour ago, their pace now a notch below sluggish. You pass a group of scribes clustered near a shady alcove, each hunched over a small tablet of wet clay. Styluses tap with rhythmic urgency as they record something you're guessing is either grain inventories or an overcomplicated family debt dispute. One scribe looks up, rubbing his temples. "These numbers don't even make sense," he groans. "We gave him 4 goats, not 40. His partner shrugs. Maybe he bribed the counting god. That's not as wild as it sounds. The Babylonians did in fact have gods for just about everything. Storms, fertility, writing, beer, brick-making, you name it. If you stub your toe, odds are there's a minor deity dedicated to toe protection who's feeling personally insulted right now. A mainstream fact floats to mind. Babylonian scribes were more than glorified note-takers. They trained for years, knew multiple languages and scripts, and held serious clout in the bureaucracy. Being a scribe meant you could read, write, and probably talk your way out of a goat-related dispute better than anyone else. You sneak a glance at one of the tablets. It's full of neat cuneiform, tiny wedge-shaped impressions aligned with intimidating precision. You can't help but admire the skill. Then you remember you once misspelled cow on a temple offering form and had to clean goat stalls for a week. Good times. You leave the scribes to their math anxiety and drift toward a quieter lane, where couriers move like exhausted ants between households and public buildings. A boy no older than 12 barrels past you carrying a sealed clay cylinder. You hear him mutter, "Urgent temple scroll," as he nearly trips over a cat sprawled across the path like it owns the entire empire. It probably does. You follow the path toward the commercial square, where daytime sales are winding down and evening markets begin to stir. Stalls are being reloaded with cloth, beads, amulets, and more varieties of lentils than you thought possible. The aroma of grilled onions and roasted dates mingles in the air, a fragrance that makes your stomach perk up like a hopeful dog. You eye a vendor skewering chunks of lamb and brushing them with a paste of date syrup and sesame. The meat sizzles with a mouth-watering hiss. You reach for your pouch. 2 copper coins. Enough for a skewer and possibly a second one if you agree to help the vendor sweep later. You nod. He hands one over with a wink. Extra char, no charge. You pretend that's a selling point. You bite in and nearly weep. After a day of chewing on bread that tasted like it resented your teeth, this meat feels like a reward from the gods. Tender, smoky, slightly sweet. You close your eyes. For a moment, nothing exists except grilled lamb and gratitude. Nearby, a small puppet show begins. 2 kids and a bored uncle operate reed puppets behind a cloth curtain, reenacting the tale of Gilgamesh and the Seaver Forest. Their voices squeak with effort as the puppet Enkidu bravely fights a lion made of sackcloth. The lion collapses early, possibly from stage fright. A woman next to you chuckles. They forgot the part where he cries for 3 days. You nod. The story of Gilgamesh was a big deal here. A legend passed down through clay tablets and dramatic reenactments, often with far less budget than intended. Quirky tidbit. In some versions of the epic, Gilgamesh is described as 2/3 god, 1/3 human.
Historians still argue whether this fractional math was symbolic, metaphorical, or just someone showing off their scribe skills with a poetic flex. You take another bite of lamb and move on. The crowd thickens as more people emerge for the evening cooldown. Families sit outside their doorways, sharing food, gossip, and increasingly absurd theories about which neighbor's goat caused last week's rainstorm. You pass a corner where a healer is setting up small jars of ointments and powders. One smells like crushed myrrh, and another like someone's long-forgotten sandals. He catches your eye and rattles off a list. Salve for blisters, charm for good dreams, dried lizard for balance. You raise an eyebrow. Balance? He grins. Between your feet and the afterlife.
Hard pass. But the salve does sound nice. As you continue your stroll, music begins to float through the air. Real music this time, not the goat-summoning flute from earlier. A trio of young women play lyres and sing in soft Akkadian verse. You don't understand every word, but the melody seeps into your bones. The tune is about rivers, moonlight, and a lost bracelet, possibly metaphorical, possibly just bad luck. Children chase each other between stalls, giggling and waving reeds like tiny swords. Someone's pet monkey, yes, that's a thing, sits atop a merchant's counter, gently licking spilled fig juice from a bowl. You don't ask questions. That's rule number 1 in Babylon. If you see a monkey with table manners, keep walking. You round a corner and find yourself back at a familiar shrine, one of the smaller ones, dedicated to the household goddess Gula. People leave offerings here in clay bowls, a few beans, a crust of bread, tiny ceramic animals. You place a single date pit beside a small carved dog figurine, a modest thank you for surviving another half day in this furnace of a city. The streets begin to glow orange and gold as the sun kisses the horizon. The light softens, shadows stretch even longer, and the mood, ever so slightly, begins to relax. You catch sight of the ziggurats tiers, still towering, still casting their massive silhouette across half the city. Somewhere up there, priests are performing evening rituals, lighting lamps, and probably arguing about who left the incense bowl unwashed again. You sigh. Still plenty left to do today. But at least the heat's easing off. And for now, you've got a mostly full belly, sandals that haven't disintegrated, and a date pit charm you're starting to believe might actually be lucky. You smile to yourself, step over a suspicious puddle, and follow the scent of grilled fish toward whatever adventure dusk might hold. You're not sure what time it is exactly. Babylon doesn't really believe in wristwatches. But the sky is fading from orange to a velvety indigo, and that means the real fun is about to start. Evening in the city is when Babylon breathes again. The day's chores fade into memory, the heat finally loses its grip, and people emerge like well-dressed shadows to share gossip, food, and the occasional minor miracle. You drift through the lantern-lit lanes of a neighborhood that feels fancier than you probably belong in. The bricks here are smoother, the homes taller, and the reed mats outside the doorways don't look like they've been through a sandstorm. You nod politely to a passing couple. Her linen robe practically shimmers. His beard is oiled into defiance against gravity. They don't return the nod. You decide to veer left into a side street that seems just your level of anonymous. 2 boys are racing wooden carts down a ramp, one of which bursts apart at the bottom with an explosion of clay wheels and wounded pride. The boy insists the gods sabotaged him. His friend claims it was just bad engineering. Historians still argue whether Babylon's children were miniature theologians or early physicists in disguise. Past them, you find yourself in the heart of a gathering plaza. It's a kind of open-air amphitheater, half natural and half man-made, where singers, storytellers, and illusionists take turns luring coin pouches from spectators. You spot a fire breather lighting up a palm torch with a puff of smoke and a flourish that suggests he's practiced this 1,000 times and burnt his eyebrows at least twice. A woman stands nearby chanting verses from Enheduanna, the Sumerian poetess who lived generations before Babylon hit peak popularity. Her voice is steady, the cadence like a lullaby wrapped in thunder. You only catch pieces.
Queen of all powers, the heavens bow. Something about vengeance and love. Classic combo. You slip into the crowd and watch a young man begin a shadow puppet play, using nothing but a flat torch and his oddly talented fingers. The figures on the wall dance and twist. A king, a lion, a winged creature that might be divine or might be a really angry bird. The audience laughs, gasps, claps lightly. Nearby, someone's selling bowls of lentil stew, thick with herbs and a suspicious amount of garlic. You cave, buy one, and sit with your back against a warm brick wall. The stew is, okay, a bit salty. You're not sure if it's supposed to crunch like that, but hey, protein is protein.
You notice an old man playing a stringed instrument, something between a harp and a giant spoon. He's not asking for coin, just playing. His eyes are closed, his fingers moving with the confidence of someone who's played through 5 kings and still remembers which string mourns best. You let the music settle over you like a second tunic, scratchy but comforting. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Babylonian musicians sometimes performed in temples during sacred rituals, but also at beer taverns, royal parties, and even funerals where the guest of honor didn't clap much. Music wasn't just entertainment, it was a bridge between worlds, noise spun into emotion, divine frequencies disguised as lullabies. Your legs are sore now, your brain's full. You spot an open bench carved from an old chunk of limestone, some part of a ruin before someone decided it made a decent seat. You claim it before anyone else can and let your body ooze into it. A dog ambles over and flops beside you, as if it too has had a long day of not dying. Someone nearby is whispering a ghost story. You eavesdrop, purely for cultural enrichment, of course. The tale involves a spirit that wanders abandoned temples, searching for her husband, who was turned into a statue by a jealous priest. There's a part with a cursed fig tree. You file that away under "Do not snack from suspicious plants." The stars begin to appear, first one, then a scattered sprinkle, and then, like they were just waiting for your approval, the whole sky lights up. There's no torchlight strong enough to compete with it. Babylon is many things, noisy, hot, confusing, but its night sky is a masterpiece painted fresh every evening. You overhear someone pointing out Mars and Jupiter, their Akkadian names whispered reverently. Ancient Babylonians were masters of stargazing. They charted constellations, tracked planetary movements, and probably could have predicted your horoscope better than the app on your phone. Historians still argue whether these star charts were purely scientific or deeply intertwined with omens and religious rituals. The answer is probably yes. You remember that priests atop the ziggurat sometimes held star-watching ceremonies, using tools like shadow sticks and water clocks to measure time. It sounds impressive until you realize most of the data was scrawled onto wet clay with pointy sticks. Still, it worked. Someone hands you a small reed flute. You protest, saying you're not a musician. They shrug and say, "Doesn't matter, it's nighttime." So you give it a go. 1 breath, 2 squeaks, and what might be the dying words of a duck. The dog next to you gets up and leaves. Fair. A young woman laughs nearby and offers to trade for her tambourine. You can't make that sound bad, she insists. You accept the deal, tap the skin lightly, and find that rhythm does feel nice when the stars are watching. All around you, the plaza hums. Not loud, not urgent, just the quiet, persistent murmur of a city winding down, but never quite stopping. Somewhere a jug cracks. Somewhere else, laughter spills like wine. A baby wails, and a cat yowls in response. It's not chaos, it's chorus. You stretch your legs, pat the tambourine like it's a loyal pet, and begin to wander again. The crowds are thinner now, replaced by night guards, late traders, and the kind of people who have mysterious errands best left unexamined. You tuck your coin pouch a little tighter. A man offers to read your fortune in oil drops. You pass. Another offers a protection charm woven from 7 colored reeds. You nod politely.
He insists. You buy it. He winks and says, "Now you won't dream of crocodiles." You weren't, but now you definitely will. Eventually, you circle back to a quieter part of town, one where the walls lean a bit more, the streets dip slightly uneven, and the smell of fish is more a suggestion than a statement. You've walked a lot, seen enough, and your body is officially applying for early retirement. You find a flat rooftop, technically someone else's, but unoccupied and only a little dusty. You climb the steps carefully, using a cracked stair rail and one prayer to the gods of balance. Up top, the breeze greets you like a friend. Warm, soft, just enough to make the air feel like a whisper instead of a weight. You lie back, using your pouch as a pillow. The stars above blink slowly. Your limbs sink, and the hum of Babylon sings you towards sleep, even if the night still has plans for you. Sleep? Ha, not yet. Because just as you start to melt into the rooftop like sun-softened wax, a distant clang jolts your half-dreaming brain back into the world of clay and
You clamber down the side steps, keeping quiet in case the rooftop's actual owner is the grumpy sort. Once your feet hit the dusty ground, you follow the flicker of torchlight through a series of narrowing streets that smell increasingly like incense, damp brick, and some kind of celebratory stew. You're 90% sure the last smell is intentional. The Temple of Ishtar is ahead, tall, imposing, draped in blue-glazed tiles that shimmer even in the half-dark. It's one of Babylon's most sacred spaces, devoted to the goddess of love, war, fertility, and a few other things that feel wildly incompatible until you remember gods are allowed to multitask. A mainstream historical note flickers in your mind. The Temple of Ishtar wasn't just a place of worship. It played a central role in civic life, housing sacred texts, legal documents, and hosting rituals that might affect the outcome of entire harvests. It was spiritual and political HQ, all in one. You edge closer to the temple courtyard where a gathering has formed. Mostly priests, musicians, and the sort of people who know how to walk quietly in sandals. Someone's laying down lines of powder, crushed lapis perhaps, or ground barley flour. Ritual symbols spiral outward like ancient crop circles. A girl no older than 12 stands in the center, eyes closed, arms raised. She wears a robe stitched with silver thread and looks like she hasn't blinked in 15 minutes. A priest begins to chant, a low, rumbling sound that makes your ribs vibrate. One by one, others join in. The rhythm rises, your skin prickles. And then you hear it. Flutes, drums, and the metallic chime of bronze rattles. A small procession enters, carrying icons of the goddess, lions, stars, a palm frond tied with red ribbon. The crowd parts, the girl opens her eyes, and for a moment you think she glows. It could be the firelight. It could be something else. Someone next to you mutters, "They say she was chosen in a dream." You nod like that's completely normal. You're deep enough into Babylon now that divinely selected oracle child barely registers as weird. And here comes a quirky tidbit. In some festivals, the Babylonians believed the gods literally entered the statues during rituals, like celestial Airbnb bookings. These events were so important that priests would guard the statues around the clock, and elaborate feasts were prepared for the divine guests. Imagine cooking for a god that might or not show up. The pressure. The music crests, and the girl begins to speak, not loudly, but with the kind of voice that makes silence lean in. It's a prayer, half recited, half sung. You catch phrases about crops, rivers, protection from illness, and something about a seven-headed wind. Classic apocalypse imagery. Historians still argue whether these nighttime rituals were for divine communion, political signaling, or just a deeply committed form of ancient theater. You don't care either way. Right now, it's beautiful. And just like that, the ceremony winds down. The chanting softens. The girl lowers her arms. The crowd exhales. A priest offers a platter of dates and sesame cakes to the goddess,
i.e. the altar, and people begin to drift away, murmuring softly. You linger a little longer, just watching the firelight flicker off the tiles. Eventually, you peel yourself away and wander back through the alleys, slower now. The adrenaline's worn off, replaced by that warm, sleepy feeling that only comes after watching something old, sacred, and oddly hypnotic. You cross a narrow bridge over a shallow canal. Somewhere beneath the water, frogs chirp like tiny percussionists. You pause to let the breeze cool your cheeks. The sky's darker now, the stars sharper. You spot a few constellations, at least ones you think are constellations. They might just be a bunch of bright dots someone gave poetic names to centuries ago. You reach a quieter district near the edge of the city. Houses here are humbler. Fewer lanterns, more crickets. You pass a courtyard where someone's asleep in a hammock, a cat curled on their chest like a living blanket. You consider joining them just out of solidarity. But first, water. Your lips are dry and your sandals are full of regrets. You spot a small shrine with a communal jug beside it. The water's clean, cool, and tastes faintly of clay and mint. You drink deeply, splash your face, and lean against the wall with a contented sigh. Babylon may be chaos in sandal form, but it knows how to share a drink. A dog trots by, glances at you, and moves on. You feel like that says something profound about your place in the universe.
You spot a stone bench beside the shrine, half shaded by a tree that somehow thrives in this dust. You sit, stretch out your legs, and let your eyes drift upward. No more rituals tonight, no more flutes. Just the stars, the breeze, and the fading rhythm of a city that's ancient, sleepless, and always humming. You close your eyes. This time, you almost sleep. Sleep finally tugs at you, but only gently. The kind of tug that says, sure, close your eyes, but don't get too comfortable. Because no sooner have you started drifting off under the dusty leaves of that shrine tree than a small but determined hand starts shaking your shoulder. You jolt upright, half expecting a priest, a guard, or a particularly judgy stray goat, but no, it's a kid. Probably 10 years old, scrawny as a barley stalk, eyes wide with panic, and just enough drama to suggest something very Babylonian is about to happen. "You're needed," the kid whispers. You blink. "By who?" He shrugs. "Don't know. You helped the fish woman, right?" Your brain takes a moment to rewind. Ah, yes, the fish seller from earlier. The one with the aggressive eyebrows and the daughter learning fractions via lentil counting. You nod. "She's my aunt," he adds, grabbing your wrist now. "Come quick." Because, sure, why not get wrapped up in someone else's midnight crisis? After all, sleep is for the weak, or the organized. The kid drags you through shadowy alleys and past buildings that seem sleepier than you are. Eventually, you're led into a cluttered courtyard that smells of old onions and slightly singed hair. There, sitting on a stool, is the fish seller, and she's furious. Turns out her delivery cart's missing. Not her entire cart, mind you, just the wheel. One big wooden wheel gone without a trace. She explains the problem in rapid Akkadian that the kid translates with impressive flair. Apparently, this isn't the first time a wheel has disappeared mysteriously at night. A rumor's going around that someone is stealing them to sell as makeshift shields to mercenaries outside the walls. You nod sagely, because it's too late to admit this is far above your non-existent Babylonian detective skills. But you do offer to help, and because you've now committed, you get handed a torch and a stale piece of flatbread, because obviously this is going to be an adventure. Quirky tidbit incoming. Babylon had actual night watchmen, an early version of security guards who walked the streets with torches, dogs, and the occasional loud stick. While they weren't exactly crime-solving geniuses, their presence was supposed to deter theft, fire, and poorly behaved goats. Historians still argue whether these guards were truly effective or mostly ceremonial. You play the amateur sleuth, scanning the ground near where the cart once stood.
Sure enough, there's a long groove in the dirt, something heavy dragged away. You follow the mark, weaving through side alleys until the groove disappears near a narrow doorway half covered by a woven mat. You peer in. Inside, it's dark, except for the flicker of a tiny oil lamp on a shelf. And beside it, the wheel, leaning like it belongs there. And also, a second wheel, and what might be a broken door. And, very suspiciously, a pile of fish scales. You freeze. Then, a figure stirs in the corner. A wiry man with wild hair, eyes like saucers, and the unmistakable energy of someone who's been awake far too long. He mutters something about the prophecy of circular movement and offers you a piece of smoked eel. You decline. Instead, you gently explain that one of those wheels belongs to the fish seller, and you'd like it returned. He seems surprised, insists it was abandoned, offers to trade it for a small idol and a firm handshake. You counter with, "I don't have either of those things, but I'm not above telling your mother." That does it. With much dramatic sighing, he helps you carry the wheel back. The fish seller is pleased, the child is proud, and you, still somehow holding that flatbread, are rewarded with a warm bowl of fish stew and an emphatic slap on the back. The stew's not bad, actually, a little gritty, but full of protein and gratitude. You sit in the courtyard, sipping stew and watching the sky lighten at the edges. It's almost morning. Again. The stars are fading, retreating like actors behind a curtain. A rooster crows somewhere, startling itself with its own volume.
Your eyes are heavy now, really heavy. You lie back on a woven mat the fish seller offers, feeling the stiffness in your limbs settle like old clay. The kid curls up beside you, already snoring with the weird innocence of someone who's never paid taxes. Somewhere in the city, a baker is stoking his oven. Somewhere else, a priest is preparing the temple grounds for another endless round of offerings. And somewhere nearby, the wheel thief is probably sketching wild spirals in the dirt and muttering about sacred geometry. Babylon, even in its half-sleeping state, never really stops, it just shifts gears. You stare at the sky and think about what this city really is. A place of gods and gutters, of scrolls and stew, of logic and lunacy, baked together like sun-dried bricks. It's brilliant and exhausting. And just as your thoughts begin to dissolve like mist, one last historical fact drifts through your head. Babylon had over 50 temples, countless gods, and a belief system so tangled it made spiderwebs jealous. And yet, somehow, it worked. People lived, prayed, fished, argued over wheels. You smile. Then sleep takes you, finally, for now. The first thing you feel is warmth. Not the soft, cozy warmth of a blanket, more like the full-body toast of a clay wall that's been soaking in the sun for hours. You open one eye. The sun is up, and so are the flies. A few of them buzz lazily around your head like tiny flying critics unimpressed by your sleeping posture. You sit up slowly. Your back protests with a series of creaks that sound like someone unrolling a scroll that's been wet and forgotten in a basement. The fish seller's courtyard is alive again. Someone is washing utensils with sand, a cat is licking something you really hope wasn't your breakfast, and the kid is arguing with a neighbor about who has the better date palm tree. Welcome back to Babylon. Your stomach grumbles in a tone that suggests it has now joined the rebellion. You haven't had anything solid since that heroic bowl of fish stew. Time for breakfast. You remember passing a baker's stall during your early explorations. It had smelled like roasted heaven. You head that way now, navigating the maze of alleyways that feel somehow more forgiving in daylight. Babylon's bricks glow golden now, their sharp corners softened by the sunlight. The city hums with purpose. Potters are turning wheels, donkeys are braying like their lives are unbearably difficult, and shopkeepers are shouting about barley prices like it's the end of the world. The baker's stall comes into view. It's barely more than a stone oven and a table, but the smell, the smell.
Fresh flatbreads stacked like edible scrolls, sesame-sprinkled rings cooling in a basket, and something sizzling on a flat slab that might be onions or might be magic. You order one of everything. You don't even ask the price. You're too hungry to haggle. The baker eyes you with the kind of respect one reserves for people who clearly haven't eaten since Hammurabi was a teenager. Quirky tidbit: Babylonian recipes have actually been found on clay tablets, some dating back over 3,500 years. One describes a stew with lamb, garlic, onions, and multiple herbs, which, honestly, doesn't sound too far off from what you were fed last night. Historians still argue whether these recipes were meant for royal kitchens or everyday folks, but one thing's clear: Babylonians loved their food spiced and layered, not just bland gruel. Respect. As you munch on a honey-glazed bread twist, yes, it's as good as it sounds, you wander deeper into the city. You notice something peculiar. People are gathering in small groups, murmuring. A man on a wooden stool is reading aloud from a clay tablet, voice booming like he's auditioning for a one-man play. Curiosity tugs at your ankle like a puppy. You move closer. The tablet is an official decree, freshly baked from the governor's court. It talks about grain taxes, river access, and a warning about forged seals. Apparently, some enterprising individuals have been creating fake authorization marks to cheat temple rations. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Babylon's bureaucracy was absurdly advanced. They used seals, signatures, and archives to track everything from crop yields to fish counts. If you think modern paperwork is exhausting, imagine doing it all on slabs of clay that had to be dried and filed away in massive archives. And yes, losing the paperwork back then literally meant breaking a 10-pound tablet. Oops.
You glance over and see a scribe sitting cross-legged with a stylus tucked behind his ear. He's busy scratching notes onto a tablet, surrounded by a few younger apprentices, each looking equal parts fascinated and terrified of making a mistake. You watch him press symbols into the soft surface, the wedge-shaped script mesmerizing in its precision. You catch his eye. He raises an eyebrow, then gestures you over. "You literate?" he asks. You hesitate. Technically, no. But do you want to see what it's like to carve your name in clay? Absolutely. He hands you a spare tablet and stylus. The thing has the density of a frozen lasagna. You awkwardly copy the shapes he shows you, and it turns out writing cuneiform is less like drawing letters and more like stabbing a marshmallow repeatedly and hoping for the best. Still, you manage something vaguely coherent. The scribe inspects it, tilts his head, and pronounces it adequate for a grain receipt, not for love poetry. You take that as a win. Suddenly, a young apprentice points skyward. A shadow moves across the sun, circling wide and slow. Everyone looks up. It's a hawk, or is it a vulture? Either way, it casts a lazy spiral over the city, then disappears toward the river. Good omen, the scribe mutters, or bad, depending. Historians still argue whether Babylonian bird signs were truly believed or mostly ritualized habits, because honestly, when life gives you omens, people tend to see whatever confirms what they already want. But in this moment, everyone seems content to take it as a good sign. You thank the scribe and tuck your little tablet in the folds of your sash, where it promptly threatens to crack your hip bone. Paper. You miss paper. A distant horn blows once, then again. It's not alarmingly loud, but it's official. Something's starting. You follow the sound, weaving through crowds that grow thicker as you move toward the city's northern quadrant. People are whispering, "The procession, it's today?" Apparently, you've lucked your way into one of Babylon's rare civic parades. Something about the Temple of Marduk, a tax relief decree, and maybe a public feast. Details are fuzzy, but enthusiasm is high. And right on cue, the avenue begins to clear. Guards line the street, holding staffs tipped with carved animal heads. Musicians tune their lyres, drums begin their steady thrum, and then procession.
Priests in robes trimmed with lapis, nobles in gold-threaded tunics, giant wheeled statues of the gods pulled by oxen with horns polished to a mirror shine. Children toss petals, women wave incense braziers. Somewhere near the back, a man dressed as a goat tries very hard to look important. It's surreal and gorgeous. You stand on tiptoe to watch the statue of Marduk roll by, his face stern, beard curled, eyes inlaid with mother of pearl. People bow, whisper prayers, or toss little offerings toward his wheeled platform. And you, still holding the sticky remains of your breakfast, just grin like an idiot. Because honestly, this city might be chaotic, dusty, loud, and exhausting, but it knows how to throw a parade. The parade slows as it winds toward the temple quarter, the grand statue of Marduk now looming above the crowd like a stone-faced celebrity on a very slow float. You try not to think about how many oxen it must have taken to drag that thing down a cobbled street without face-planting into a public fountain. Spoiler, probably more than a few. The people around you begin to disperse, most heading toward the temple complex to continue their offerings and rituals. A woman near you clutches a small goat by a rope leash, clearly heading to make a sacrificial offering. You give the goat a sympathetic look. It blinks back at you like, "Yeah, I know." You, meanwhile, follow the smell of something deeply fried. It leads you to a tiny stall wedged between a lamp vendor and a man selling, is that crocodile teeth? The food stand is run by a stout woman with arms like amphora handles and a smile that says she's already seen 10 versions of you today. She hands you a piping hot bundle wrapped in palm leaves, some kind of fried lentil cake with herbs. It's crispy, it's spicy, it's the best thing you've eaten since you got here. You try to tell her as much, but she just waves you off and demands 2 barley tokens. You're broke.
Fortunately, your newfound reputation as that wheel-finding foreigner seems to carry some weight. A nearby teen offers to cover your snack if you'll help him translate a phrase etched onto a broken amulet. Sure, why not? Your cuneiform skills are subpar, but your confidence is sky-high. You both sit in the shade and puzzle over the clay shard. The phrase appears to be something like, "May the moon god's sin protect the bearer from toothworms." Mainstream fact: ancient Babylonians firmly believed that cavities were caused by tiny worms living in your teeth. There's even a medical text where a toothworm is addressed directly and asked to leave in the name of healing gods. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or if they truly imagined tiny squirming creatures feasting on molars. Either way, floss, people. After this unexpected foray into ancient dentistry, your new teen friend points out something unusual: a column of smoke rising just beyond the city walls, near the irrigation ditches. It doesn't look like a fire, more like a controlled burn. Curiosity taps you on the shoulder again. The teen grins. "Field burning," he says. "Wanna go?" You shrug. "Do I need sandals for this?" Apparently not. Moments later, you're trudging out of the city gate with a small group of Babylonian youths who treat this entire thing like a school trip. Beyond the walls, the world opens up. Fields of barley and emmer wheat sway in the hot breeze, irrigation canals glisten in the sunlight, and goats judge you silently from their pastures. You reach the burned field, where a few workers are already stamping out the smoldering edges of a crop patch. One of them, a leathery old man with arms like knotted rope, explains the practice. Burning the stubble helps prepare the soil, scare off pests, and keep the fertility of the land intact. And yes, you can feel the heat from 50 feet away. Quirky tidbit: Babylonian farmers sometimes added ash from burnt fig trees to their soil as a kind of organic enrichment. It was believed to help appease the earth gods and, simultaneously, make the land smell less like wet goat. Both noble goals. As you walk back toward the canal, you're invited to join the workers for a quick break. They sit under a makeshift canopy, sipping a cloudy, lukewarm drink from shared cups. You take a cautious gulp. It's beer. Or rather, the ancestor of beer. Thick, sour, and chunky enough to chew.
You're told it's brewed from emmer wheat and flavored with date syrup, or sometimes mustard seeds. You blink slowly at that detail. Still, it's not the worst thing you've drunk today. That honor goes to the canal water you accidentally splashed in your mouth an hour ago. The conversation turns, as it often does, to taxes. One man complains about how the scribes never record the real yield. Another curses a neighbor for underreporting his goat count and still getting full temple rations. You nod sympathetically, pretending you understand the logistics of goat-based economic structures. Mainstream historical fact: Babylon had an incredibly detailed taxation system based on harvest yields, livestock counts, and trade records. Taxes could be paid in silver, grain, animals, or labor. And yes, fudging the numbers was both common and punishable. Historians still argue whether the enforcement was uniformly strict or varied wildly, depending on bribes, social rank, or the mood of the local priest. After the break, you're offered the chance to help irrigate one of the side fields. This turns out to involve redirecting water from a canal using a heavy wooden sluice gate and about 20 minutes of yelling at each other while standing ankle-deep in mud. You're utterly soaked, smell like damp straw, and honestly, you're having a great time. One of the workers teaches you a chant used to encourage the water to flow. It's rhythmic, hypnotic, and contains at least one line about frogs listening to human complaints. Back at the city gate, you wave goodbye to your new agricultural pals. Your tunic is half-stained, you're sunburned in weird places, and a small beetle has decided your hair is home now. Babylon has a way of chewing you up and spitting you back, mildly improved. By now, the light is turning golden. The heat eases just enough to make you realize how sore your legs are. You walk slowly, savoring the soft breeze and the low murmur of city life, picking back up.
You head toward the ziggurat again, the massive temple tower catching the last rays of sun like a lighthouse of bricks and divine bureaucracy. You sit at its base, watching merchants pack up their wares, children chase each other with reed toys, and a man try to convince a goat to wear a flower crown. It does not go well. You lean back, let the warm stones support you, and sigh. Another day in Babylon. And you survived it. Barely. You don't even mean to fall asleep. 1 minute you're reclining against the warm base of the ziggurat, eyes half closed, lulled by the chatter of nearby vendors packing up their dates and grain sacks. The next, you're being nudged awake by a boy holding a bundle of reeds and muttering something about ceremonial sweepers needing the steps clear. You shuffle to your feet with a groan that sounds like it belongs to someone triple your age. The ziggurat looms behind you, a stair-stepped giant reaching toward the bruised purple sky. The last sunlight slips away, and Babylon transforms again, just like it did last night. The heat fades, the shadows deepen, and the night smells arrive. Oil lamps, sweet incense, baked clay, and, yes, fish again. You wander aimlessly for a while. It's peaceful in that Babylonian way, which still includes shouting, livestock traffic jams, and some kid yelling about a stolen sandal. Eventually, you find yourself back in the temple quarter. The main avenue here is dotted with small shrines, each dedicated to a different god or protective spirit. Some are no bigger than a broom closet, others as grand as suburban houses. People come and go quietly, slipping in to whisper prayers, leave offerings, or light bits of fragrant resin in shallow bronze dishes. You pause at a shrine to Nabu, the god of writing and wisdom. His symbol, a stylus resting on a clay tablet, is carved above the doorway. A priest notices you loitering and offers you a tiny votive figurine, just a few inches tall, made of clay and painted with a reddish slip. For clarity of thought, he says, and slips it into your hand. You feel a little awkward about it, but also weirdly comforted. It fits snugly in your palm, like a pocket-sized reminder that someone, somewhere, invented paperwork. Mainstream historical fact: Nabu wasn't just a god of scribes, he was associated with destiny itself.
His temple in Babylon, the Ezida, kept records of planetary motion, dreams, and royal decrees. Historians still argue whether he was originally a standalone deity or developed later as a companion to Marduk, the main god. What's not debated? His cult lasted for centuries and spanned empires. As the night deepens, you pass by one of the city's quieter marvels, a water clock. It's simple, just a ceramic bowl with a small hole in the bottom floating in a larger container. As it slowly fills and sinks, priests can track the hours. Not wildly accurate, but hey, it's the Bronze Age. Quirky tidbit: Babylonian water clocks were also used to time speeches, trials, and even bath soaks. You imagine someone arguing, "Objection, I still have 3 drips left." You follow the winding path toward the residential quarters. People are settling down now. Families gather on rooftops with cushions and small dishes of food. Dogs curl beside their owners. Someone strums a lyre and sings about a lion and a moon goddess. You're not fluent enough to follow, but the melody is lovely, even a little haunting. A few streets over, you catch the flicker of torchlight. A small procession moves through the alley, led by a priest shaking a bundle of herbs. A sick child is carried by her parents, pale and quiet, wrapped in a thin wool blanket. They're bringing her to one of the healing temples. You hang back respectfully, watching. The temple itself is modest but clean, brightly lit, the doorway guarded by painted tiles showing snakes and birds. Inside, healers wait with jars of oils, reeds, and incantation tablets. Babylonian medicine is a strange blend of empirical treatment and spiritual ritual. They'll examine the child, chant spells, rub her with river clay, and maybe prescribe a potion made from crushed dates and goat's milk. Mainstream historical fact: Babylonian medical texts show an early understanding of symptoms and treatments, particularly for digestive issues, fevers, and wounds. But illness was also thought to come from angry gods, curses, or malevolent demons. Historians still argue whether their cures were more placebo or truly effective, though some remedies, like antiseptic beer or willow bark, did have real benefits.
A temple attendant catches your gaze and gestures you inside. You smile and politely decline. You're not sick, just sleep-deprived, semi-lost, and slightly sunburned. Nothing a blanket and 8 hours won't fix. You keep walking, letting the streets lead you now. Eventually, you stumble upon a courtyard where a small puppet show is in progress. A man with thick eyebrows and a gift for exaggerated voices is acting out the Epic of Gilgamesh using painted wooden figures. The audience, mostly children, squeals with laughter as the puppet Enkidu fights a lion, only to get his puppet foot stuck in a bucket. It's wildly off script, but completely charming. You settle in at the back of the group. The man improvises new lines, giving the ancient tale a fresh spin. He has Gilgamesh brag about how his beard is registered in 3 provinces, and make jokes about missing sandals. The kids love it. Even you chuckle, the sound surprising you. It's nice to laugh. Quirky tidbit: while the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest known stories, fragments suggest it was also performed aloud with musical accompaniment, and maybe even in theatrical form. Historians still argue whether these performances were sacred rituals or pure entertainment. But based on this puppet guy, the answer might be both. After the show, you thank the performer and drop one of your precious copper tokens in his bowl. He gives you a nod, and one of the kids waves at you like you're suddenly part of the story. You find a quiet bench under a fig tree near a closed shopfront. You sit, exhale, and finally let your muscles unwind. You reach into your sash and pull out the tiny Nabu figurine. You set it gently beside you. The night around you buzzes with soft life. Distant laughter, snoring, sandals scraping cobbles, and the constant whisper of the Euphrates. You survived another day. You might even be starting to like it here. Just don't tell anyone. You're dozing again. This time under a fig tree, cheek pressed against your own shoulder like a poorly folded napkin. The stone bench beneath you is surprisingly warm, as if it's been holding on to the heat of the day just for this moment. The little Nabu figurine rests on your thigh, and you swear it's smirking.
The sound that pulls you from the brink of sleep isn't alarming. It's soft, rhythmic. A low thump-thump, swish. You blink and look toward the sound. It's coming from a group of night workers hauling sacks of something through the alleyways. You fall in line with them like an accidental intern. One man raises an eyebrow but shrugs. You look awake, good enough. You're now unofficially part of Babylon's most invisible workforce, the night haulers. Your new co-workers are transporting sacks of barley to one of the granaries on the other side of the district. By day, the streets are too congested for such heavy hauling. But at night, well, that's when the undercurrent of the city kicks into gear. All the hidden gears and pulleys that keep the city from sinking under its own rituals, festivals, and fish guts. Mainstream historical fact. Babylon had well-organized storage systems and public granaries. Grain was not just food. It was currency, temple tax, and the basis of almost every trade transaction. Night work like this helped maintain steady flow without clogging up daylight rituals. Historians still argue whether this infrastructure was managed by the temple or if private merchants had more influence behind the scenes. One of the older haulers tells you the sack you're dragging is worth at least 2 goats' worth of silver. You nod, then realize you've started measuring everything in livestock, like a true Babylonian. What's next? Pricing sandals and chickens? You finally reach the granary, a massive mud brick building with vents in the walls and guards who look like they were born suspicious. After a brief grunt-based exchange, you're led inside. It's cooler than you expected, with orderly stacks of sacks and jars sealed with clay. A supervisor approaches. He's got the vibe of someone who yells professionally, and checks off your delivery with a stylus on a wax tablet. You peer at the tablet curiously, half hoping it says something juicy like, "Don't trust the weaver with the pointy chin." Instead, it just lists weights, dates, and temple destinations. You find a moment to sit and catch your breath. Someone offers you a small cup of something dark and bitter. Early coffee? Nope. It's date and spice tea, served warm in a tiny cup that's chipped in 3 places but feels like gold in your hands.
Quirky tidbit, Babylonians loved date syrup. They used it for everything, sweetening drinks, preserving food, even sealing wounds. Some wealthier households reportedly soaked fish in it, which raises the eternal question, why? Refreshed, you step back outside and follow the others toward the animal pens. Yes, apparently, it's time to help clean out the livestock areas. You're handed a rake made from bundled reeds and led to a corral of extremely unimpressed goats. One immediately tries to chew your tunic. You and goat number 12 have a stare-down that lasts too long. Eventually, you blink. Goat wins. You rake straw, collect droppings in baskets, and try not to step in anything squishy. It's humbling work, but you get the feeling that everyone here respects it. Or at least they respect the fact that someone else is doing it. Mainstream fact. Babylonian temples often maintained herds of goats, sheep, and cattle. The animals were used for sacrifices, feasts, and trade. The temple economy was complex and nearly self-sufficient, almost a state within a state. Historians still argue whether temple workers were volunteers, conscripts, or a hereditary class tied to their roles. You pause for a moment, leaning against a fence post, and look up at the stars. They're breathtaking. Unlike the hazy glow of modern cities, Babylon's night sky stretches wide and clear. Constellations leap out in sharp clusters. A priest nearby points toward one and says, "That's the bowl of heaven." You smile politely, but he continues. "It came down to punish Gilgamesh. Now it watches." He goes on to describe how different stars represent gods, spirits, and omens. Babylonians were serious about astronomy. They kept detailed records of celestial movement, not just for religious reasons, but also for agriculture, festivals, and, some say, early attempts at astrology. Quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian tablets suggest they used math to predict lunar eclipses centuries before the Greeks. Historians still argue whether these methods were shared knowledge or closely guarded by priest astronomers. You wonder how many nighttime haulers learned the stars by hauling barley in the dark. The priest smiles at you and adds, "The stars tell stories. You just have to be quiet enough to hear them." You're quiet after that. When the last goat is penned and the night teas run dry, you thank your unexpected hosts. One woman slips you a date cake wrapped in linen for the walk home. You're not even sure where home is anymore, but it warms your chest. You trudge back toward the ziggurat district, stepping over sleepy dogs and under the flicker of dying torches. The air smells less like fish now and more like ashes, straw, and the faint, sweet trace of myrrh. Your feet hurt. Your tunic is stained. Your hair may or may not contain goat. But you're still upright, still breathing, still somehow part of this odd ancient rhythm. You sit again under your fig tree, unwrap the date cake, and take a slow bite. Soft. Warm. A little gritty, but not bad. You lean back and close your eyes, letting the hum of the sleeping city drift over you. Tomorrow will come soon enough. Morning in Babylon doesn't arrive gently. It stomps in, shoves the night aside, and starts banging on pots. You're awakened by a rooster who sounds like he's auditioning for an opera and a neighbor shouting something about stolen lentils. Your back complains as you sit up from your fig tree bench. Every joint cracks like it's reciting a poem in Morse code. The sun is rising over the eastern edge of the city, turning the ziggurat's highest steps gold. The warmth is welcome, but the light is merciless. Every layer of dust, every crease in your tunic, every misstep you've made is suddenly visible. You take a deep breath, stretch your arms, and decide today you're going to bathe. Yes, even in Babylon, hygiene matters. You make your way toward the canal district, where public bathing spaces and private washing corners coexist in a delicate social dance. On the way, you pass groups of early risers already hard at work. Bakers slapping dough onto clay oven walls, women grinding grain with rhythmic precision, and children chasing a goat that does not want to be chased. The public bath is nothing like your modern shower. It's a stone basin filled with slightly murky water fed by a nearby canal. You wait your turn, standing barefoot on sun-warmed bricks. A woman scrubs her toddler's hair with river sand. A man is singing to himself in Sumerian. Someone's definitely using crocodile dung soap. Mainstream historical fact: Babylonian hygiene practices included regular washing with sand, clay, and sometimes perfumed oils. Crocodile dung, natron, and milk were used in beauty regimens, particularly by the wealthy. Historians still argue whether these practices were purely cosmetic or also tied to ritual cleanliness required by temple rules. Your turn arrives. You step gingerly into the basin, sigh at the cool water, and begin splashing the night off your limbs. There's no soap, but someone hands you a reed fiber scrubber. It's scratchy but effective. You scrape off dust, goat residue, and regret. A woman nearby offers you a dab of scented oil from a tiny ceramic jar. You dab it behind your ears. Suddenly, you smell faintly of thyme and crushed flowers. Not bad. Feeling semi-human again, you dry off with your tunic, which somehow looks worse after the bath, and head back toward the main avenue. You haven't eaten yet, and your stomach is filing a formal complaint. Luckily, food vendors are setting up their stalls. You pass by trays of lentil patties, honeyed dates, and something you're pretty sure is just salted fish pretending to be jerky. One man beckons you over and offers a king's breakfast for 3 coppers. You give him a skeptical glance, but your stomach overrules you. The breakfast includes flatbread, olives, dried figs, and a boiled egg that may or may not have been stolen from that angry rooster earlier. It's simple, salty, and surprisingly satisfying. Quirky tidbit: Babylonian breakfast wasn't always a formal meal. Often it was just leftovers from the night before or quick snacks bought at market. Wealthier citizens might enjoy beer-thick porridge or fruit preserves. Historians still argue whether communal meals were more common than solitary ones. Clay tablet records suggest both. You munch thoughtfully, sitting on the low edge of a fountain shaped like a bowl. A boy drops a fish in it. His mother smacks the back of his head and mutters something about irrigation spirits. The fish seems unbothered.
Refueled, you wander toward the artisan's quarter. It's noisier here. Chisel taps, hammer thuds, the occasional bark of a vendor arguing over copperweights. The smell is stronger too. Molten bronze, burned wood, and that oddly appealing scent of sun-warmed leather. You peek inside a weaver's workshop. Rows of looms line the room, each with vertical warp threads hanging like sleepy vines. Women and older children work rhythmically, passing shuttle threads through with practiced hands. The patterns emerging are geometric, zigzags, chevrons, repeating diamonds. One weaver catches your eye and waves you in. Before you know it, you're helping untangle a massive snarl of wool that looks like it's been arguing with itself for hours. It's oddly therapeutic. By the end of it, the woman thanks you and presses a small scrap of woven cloth into your hand. It's only a few inches wide, but the pattern is mesmerizing. A deep blue background with golden thread looping in waves.
Mainstream historical fact: Babylonian textiles were renowned across Mesopotamia. They used plant-based dyes, wool, and imported luxury fibers. Some patterns had symbolic meanings, like water motifs to invoke protection or fertility. Historians still argue whether the most elaborate cloths were temple-exclusive or also used in elite households. You tuck the cloth into your sash alongside your Nabu figurine and your rapidly disintegrating date cake wrapper. Just beyond the weaver's row is the potter's alley. Here, kilns belch smoke and men with clay-smudged arms spin wheels like caffeinated philosophers. One man proudly shows you a sealed jar bearing the royal seal, used for shipping goods like oil or wine to far-off cities. He mimics a puffed-up merchant and yells, "Special delivery to Nineveh!" Everyone laughs. Quirky tidbit: Babylonian potters often left personal marks on their wares, kind of like signatures. Some even included little jokes or drawings inside lids. One archaeologist reportedly found a lid with a fish drawn next to the word surprise. Historians still argue whether these were craftsmen's inside jokes or secret symbols of workshop guilds. As you step away from the heat of the kilns, you catch a scent that instantly cuts through all the smoke and dust. Spices. You follow your nose to a trader unpacking bundles of cinnamon bark, dried garlic cloves, cumin, and, of course, more dates. He's grumbling about a bad shipment from Dilmun, which you're pretty sure is the ancient word for, delays again. You help him stack a few crates in exchange for a whiff of myrrh resin. It smells like smoke, citrus, and bedtime stories. The city buzzes behind you. Endless motion, endless life. You feel slightly out of place, yes, but also oddly rooted, like you've joined a rhythm older than history books. You wander back toward the ziggurat, weaving through musicians, goats, students, incense sellers, and one man who seems to be shouting his entire grocery list to the sky. Babylon breathes. And for now, you breathe with it. You're halfway through peeling a pomegranate when a boy runs past, nearly knocking it from your hands. He's barefoot, shirtless, and definitely in trouble, judging by the older man chasing him with a broom and shouting about stolen onions. You step aside just in time, and the chase thunders past in a cloud of dust and indignation. A temple bell chimes. You pause, not because you know what it means, but because everyone else pauses. People straighten up, traders stop yelling, and even a nearby donkey looks momentarily thoughtful. Then the movement resumes, but in a slightly different rhythm. The bell means the temple is shifting roles. Priests rotate, the outer courtyards reopen, and now it's time for petitions. You follow the small stream of people moving toward the Esagila complex, the grand temple dedicated to Marduk, chief god of Babylon. It dominates the horizon like a layered mountain, every level built with careful geometry and purpose. You'd been here before, briefly, but only to peek. This time, you want to see what it's like for ordinary citizens who come with problems, prayers, and maybe a bribe or two. As you near the gate, you're stopped by a temple attendant with a shaved head and eyes like he's seen every excuse. He looks at your tunic, shrugs, and lets you in with a wave. No questions.
You must look poor enough to not be a threat, but just clean enough to not be contagious. Inside the temple courtyard, the mood is serious. Rows of men and women sit or kneel near the stone benches, each clutching a small offering: bread, oil, small clay figurines, or folded cloth. Mainstream historical fact: Babylonian temples functioned not only as religious centers but also civic institutions. People brought disputes, contracts, and grievances here for divine arbitration. Priests recorded decisions on clay tablets, some of which still exist. Historians still argue whether these records were binding legal precedents or more ceremonial guidelines enforced only by social pressure. You find a shaded alcove near a low wall where someone left a clay tablet inscribed with tiny cuneiform wedges. You can't read it, of course, but it looks official and probably uncomfortably detailed. A woman next to you notices your curiosity and leans in. "It's a marriage contract," she says, chewing on a pomegranate seed. "He promised her 5 sheep and half a house. She gets it if he runs off." You blink. "That's oddly modern." She smirks. "We're not savages."
Then she's called forward by a priest, and you're left holding a sticky pomegranate and a new respect for Mesopotamian prenups. Quirky tidbit: Babylonian marriage contracts often included stipulations like guaranteed food rations, inheritance rights, and oddly specific breakup clauses. One even included a clause about returning a wedding gift if the bride was found habitually rude. Historians still argue whether these were widely enforced or just idealistic scribbles. You wander toward another section of the temple where a line has formed in front of a man with an enormous beard and an extremely tiny stylus. He's writing notes onto wax tablets, occasionally muttering to himself. From context, it seems this is the suggestion box for the gods. People whisper their concerns, complaints, and petitions, and he scribbles them down to be read aloud during ritual prayers later in the day. You step up, unsure what to say. I'd like less dust and fewer goats with attitude." He doesn't look up. Noted. You step aside, passing a priestess with a silver headdress. She's lighting incense along a narrow corridor lined with god statues, each nestled in its own alcove. One has the serene face of Ea, god of water and wisdom. Another has the fierce, lion-like features of Ishtar in warrior mode. You offer a slow nod to each. A procession of children walks by carrying woven baskets filled with flower petals and carved amulets. One drops a small wooden cat figurine. You pick it up and hand it back. The child whispers, "That's for Bastu. She protects our grain." Bastu isn't in any official pantheon you've heard of. You nod solemnly anyway. Mainstream historical fact: though Babylon had a dominant state pantheon, Marduk, Ishtar, Shamash, local and household gods were equally worshipped. Families often had their own protective deities, honored with private rituals. Historians still argue whether these minor deities evolved from older tribal beliefs or were deliberately created to fill spiritual gaps left by official temples. Outside the temple walls again, the world feels brighter. You grab a drink from a street-side jar. It's cool barley water, mildly sweet, with something leafy floating in it. Probably mint. Probably. You follow your feet into the plaza near the scribes' quarter, where professional writers sit under umbrellas with clay, styluses, and terribly bad posture. One calls to you, "Want to write a love letter or a complaint to the fish merchant?" You say, "I don't know how to write." He grins. "Even better. I get to charge for 2 skills." You sit down. He flattens a small lump of wet clay and hands you a stylus. "Try your name." You make a wedge, a line, and what looks like an angry tree. He nods politely. "We'll call that interpretive." He takes over, expertly pressing symbols into the clay. "Who's this for?" You shrug. "Surprise me." He scrawls something long and dramatic. There, it says, "To the moonlit baker of my dreams, your barley cakes are sweeter than Ishtar's perfume." You blink. "That's a bit much." He beams. Flattery has never gone out of style. Quirky tidbit:
Many Babylonian clay tablets weren't just legal records, but also personal letters, poetry, and riddles. One tablet contains a riddle that roughly translates to, "Who becomes fat without eating? Who grows old without aging?" It's a road, in case you're curious. Historians still argue whether these riddles were entertainment, education tools, or part of priestly exams. The scribe lets your tablet dry near the edge of his mat. Come back tomorrow. If it doesn't crack, you can keep it. You leave with clay on your fingers and the scent of incense in your hair. Back toward the marketplace, the rhythm of the day is rising again. Haggling voices, music from a two-stringed instrument, distant bells from another temple. You pass a woman selling painted beads, a boy juggling dates, and a man loudly trying to exchange 3 jars of mustard oil for 1 slightly terrified chicken. The wind picks up a little, blowing warm air that smells like spice and sweat and stories. You feel strange there, as if you've been swept up in someone else's memory. But this is your day now, your life, borrowed for one impossible, dusty, beautiful afternoon. And it's not over yet.
You wander past the temple's edge, your fingers still caked in clay, your nose lingering with that odd perfume of incense and ash. The sun is drifting lower now, throwing long shadows across the square and turning the dust golden, like someone's spilled a bag of glitter on the earth. You reach a quieter corner of the city, not silent, but hushed compared to the clang and chatter you've grown used to. This is where the bureaucrats dwell, and, more importantly, the accountants. You heard someone earlier mutter about the tablet house, and you were curious enough to follow. Turns out it's not a house made of tablets, though that would have been impressive, but rather the nickname for the scribal archive, the place where clay records are stored, sorted, and occasionally obsessively argued over. It's essentially ancient Babylon's version of a filing cabinet, multiplied by a few thousand years and a lot of very serious beards. You duck through a low mud brick archway into a chamber that smells of damp earth and burnt cedar. Here, rows of shelves, really just slabs of wood stacked with precision, hold hundreds of clay tablets, each no larger than a paperback book, etched with lines of cuneiform so dense they look like insect tracks. Some are wrapped in cloth. Others are stored in labeled clay envelopes. Yes, envelopes made of clay. Because even in 1750 BCE, someone was worried about people peeking at the quarterly barley yield before the official audit. Mainstream historical fact: Babylonian cities maintained vast archives of clay tablets, containing everything from tax records to recipes. The most famous, found in Nineveh's library of Ashurbanipal, included medical texts, omens, hymns, and legal codes. Historians still argue whether scribes wrote all texts themselves or merely copied oral records dictated by officials or priests. A thin man in a long robe approaches, balancing a stylus behind one ear and a stern look on his face. He doesn't ask who you are, just says, "If you touch a wet tablet, you'll be the next one flattened." You nod quickly and stuff your hands behind your back like a guilty toddler. The scribe sighs. "Fine, you can observe." And so you do. You watch him retrieve a thick tablet and place it gently on a wooden table. He studies the markings, then compares it to another tablet, then another. "The governor's barley shipment figures are off," he mutters. "Again." You offer helpfully, "Maybe his donkey was cooking the books." The scribe doesn't laugh. You're not sure he's capable of it. Still, he lets you watch as he presses a correction tablet, basically a clay sticky note, then rolls a cylinder seal across the surface. The seal leaves an intricate design, a lion, a palm tree, and a line of dots. "That's my authorization mark," he explains. "If someone tries to dispute this, the seal proves who wrote it." Quirky tidbit. Cylinder seals were like ancient signatures or IDs, tiny, carved stone rollers pressed into wet clay to mark documents or goods. Some were intricately carved and passed down through generations.
Historians still argue whether cylinder seals were purely administrative or also carried magical or spiritual significance. As you wander further into the archive, you notice a pile of cracked tablets stacked near the exit. These didn't dry properly, the scribe explains. Watered down clay. They warped. You squat down beside them, touching the cool, broken edges. Some still bear faint inscriptions. Names, numbers, maybe someone's long-forgotten shopping list. You wonder who they were, these ancient shoppers. Did they also get annoyed when their goat milk spoiled? Did they squint at prices and mutter about inflation? Then you remember they used silver pieces for currency, not coins. A half shekel might buy a day's worth of wheat, unless there was a drought or a war, in which case it might buy you a half-hearted insult and a rock to the head. Your stomach grumbles. Food, right. The bureaucracy's riveting, but you're not here to solve Babylonian accounting errors. You thank the scribe, he nods, barely, and step back out into the warmth. The sun is now starting to lower, and the air carries the scent of bread baking somewhere nearby. Your nose leads you through a maze of alleyways until you arrive at a modest home, its clay oven puffing out thin trails of smoke. A woman is pulling flatbreads from the fire, flipping them expertly with a long stick. Her arms are dusted with flour, and her expression is one of deep concentration or possibly mild bread-related rage. You offer a polite greeting, and she grunts, "Hungry?" You nod.
She hands you a hot disk of bread. It burns your fingers and then your tongue, but it's perfect. Soft inside, crisp edges, a hint of onion and herbs. You sigh audibly. She almost smiles. Mainstream historical fact. Bread was a staple of Babylonian diets, made in hundreds of variations, some flat, some risen, some sweetened with dates. Many were made at home, though larger cities had communal bakeries. Historians still argue whether bread distribution was rationed by the state or handled entirely by local markets. While you eat, a boy plays with a ball made of tied leather and straw. He kicks it into a basket, misses, shrugs, and tries again. You join in for a bit, your full belly making your kicks a little lazy. The boy laughs every time you miss. You glance at the horizon, colors now shifting from amber to violet. The city is winding down, but not yet asleep. A man walks by playing a reed flute, followed by a very disinterested goat. A group of girls is braiding flowers into their hair. Someone is lighting small oil lamps along a street wall, their glow flickering like stars in the stone. You sit down by the side of the road, resting your back against a sun-warmed brick. The air is cooler now, and even the dogs have stopped barking. A man next to you says softly, "Tomorrow is festival day." You ask, "For which god?" He shrugs, "Pick one. There's always a festival." You both laugh quietly, the kind of laughter that doesn't need a punchline. The day has dulled your edges. Or maybe it's just the bread coma. Quirky tidbit, Babylonian cities celebrated dozens of festivals throughout the year, some state-sponsored, others local and spontaneous. One involved releasing caged birds as omens, another featured impersonators of gods parading through the streets in costume. Historians still argue whether these festivals were intended to unify citizens or subtly control the mood of the population through ritual spectacle. You stretch your legs. The stars are starting to pierce the sky, bright, clear, countless. Somewhere, a drum taps a slow rhythm, and the city of Babylon hums softly into evening. As the city settles into its evening rhythm, you rise slowly from the warm brick wall, joints stiff from your unexpected nap under the stars. The streets of Babylon have dimmed, but they're not quiet. Lamps flicker in doorways, and families gather outside their homes on reed mats, talking softly, sharing food, or simply watching the night arrive. You wander a bit more, following the soft hum of stringed instruments and the clink of ceramic cups. Somewhere close by, there's music. Babylon, it seems, doesn't really sleep, at least not all at once. Instead, it lounges through the night in waves of laughter, song, and whispers. Eventually, you find yourself near the edge of a courtyard. It's half covered in woven canopies, and dozens of people sit cross-legged on rugs and cushions, facing a small wooden platform. A storyteller stands there, 1 foot up on a crate, gesturing with exaggerated drama as he spins a tale of gods, kings, and, rather unexpectedly, a talking turtle with divine ambitions. You linger in the shadows, drawn in. Mainstream historical fact. Storytelling was central to Mesopotamian life, with epics like the Epic of Gilgamesh passed down orally long before they were committed to clay. These tales served as both entertainment and education, often shared in communal gatherings or temple courtyards. Historians still argue whether certain myths, especially those involving animals or humorous exaggerations, were meant solely for children or served as subtle social commentary. The storyteller's voice rises and falls in a rhythm that seems hypnotic. You notice people mouthing the words in sync. They know this one by heart. The turtle, having fooled the gods with flattery, now finds himself cursed to walk forever on land, longing for the sea. It's equal parts hilarious and tragic. Someone offers you a cup of a dark, fermented drink. You accept, sip, and immediately feel a warm tingle spread across your chest. It tastes vaguely of honey and something sharp, like overripe figs. You don't ask for specifics. You just drink and listen. The turtle's fate becomes a metaphor for human ambition, and the crowd murmurs their approval. And then, it's done. The storyteller bows, people toss bits of bread or dried fruit in thanks, and the crowd begins to disperse. You stay seated a little longer. The night has thickened. A breeze kicks up tiny swirls of dust that dance through the moonlight.
Just when you're about to move, someone nudges your arm. "You knew?" the man asks, handing you another drink. You nod. He chuckles. "Come on then. Time you saw the rooftops." You follow him up a narrow staircase built into the side of a home. The steps are uneven, more of an afterthought than a design feature, but you manage to climb without face-planting. At the top, there's a wide, flat roof with low parapet walls and a few sleeping mats already laid out under the stars. Several families are here, reclining, murmuring, pointing out constellations to bored-looking kids. Quirky tidbit: rooftop sleeping was common in ancient Babylon, especially in warmer months. Homes were built with flat roofs specifically for this purpose, offering cooler temperatures and mosquito-free breezes. Some even rigged basic canopy frames for shade and privacy. Historians still argue whether roofs were also used for formal meetings or informal neighborhood gossip sessions. You lie back on one of the spare mats, the woven reeds surprisingly soft beneath you. The air is crisp now, almost chilly, but the warmth of the day still lingers in the clay walls around you. The stars above are impossibly bright, like someone punched holes in the sky and let light bleed through. You spot Orion's belt, or what you think is Orion. The Babylonians would call it something else entirely. Maybe the shepherd's staff, or the loyal guard. The man beside you points upward. "See that one? That's Marduk's dog. Follows him everywhere." You blink. Marduk had a dog? "Only at night," he grins. "During the day, it guards the city gates." You chuckle, but you can't tell if he's serious or just weaving stories. Either way, it's comforting. Mainstream historical fact: Babylonian astronomers were among the earliest to systematically study the night sky, identifying constellations and tracking celestial movements with impressive precision. Their observations helped lay the groundwork for future astronomy. Historians still argue whether astronomy and astrology were entirely separate disciplines, or if the lines were deliberately blurred for religious and political control. You remember hearing earlier that the ziggurat wasn't just a temple, it was also an observatory. Priests would climb it at night to track the moon, the planets, and the rise and fall of stars. They believed the gods moved through the heavens, and reading those patterns could foretell harvests, floods, and even war. And maybe, you think, it was also just beautiful. You turn your head slightly and watch as a young girl traces shapes in the sky with her finger.
Her older brother pretends not to care, but when she dozes off, he pulls a blanket over her. The breeze lifts it slightly, like the wings of a sleeping bird. You exhale slowly. The sounds of the city are fading. The last flute note drifts off. A donkey brays once in the distance, then thinks better of it. Your eyes begin to blur the stars. One moment you're looking at Marduk's dog, the next you're blinking through the haze of almost sleep. And just when your body begins to slip into rest, someone starts softly humming. It's an old tune, maybe a lullaby, maybe a prayer. The melody winds through the air, like smoke, rising, falling, echoing in the clay hollows around you. Quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian lullabies have been preserved in clay inscriptions, often featuring protective incantations or gentle warnings to ward off evil spirits. One begins with, "Sleep, my child. May the gods guard your dreams." Historians still argue whether these lullabies were believed to have magical power or were just poetic comfort. You let the hum cradle you. Somewhere, a lamp sputters out. A cat skitters across a rooftop and disappears into the shadows. The man beside you stretches out on his mat. "You'll get used to the heat," he mutters. "The dust, too." You whisper, "Maybe." Your eyes close. The stars swirl behind your lids. The ziggurat looms in the distance, tall and steady, a staircase to the gods. Babylon breathes beneath it, endlessly ancient, quietly alive. And tonight, for a few precious hours, you get to be part of it. You wake to the smell of smoke and the low hum of voices, faint at first, like a dream, but the kind that gently tugs you back into your body. You're still on the rooftop, your mat slightly askew, and your limbs a bit sore. The sky above is pale blue now, the stars long gone, replaced by the gentle haze of dawn. Someone nearby is grinding something with a stone pestle. Another is yawning so loudly it sounds like a lion winding up for a roar. Your stomach, perhaps inspired, joins the chorus with a hollow grumble. The rooftop family is already stirring. A mother wraps up the mats with quick, practiced movements, while a boy shuffles down the stairs with an armful of firewood. You stretch and sit up. Babylon is stirring too. A breeze brushes past your face, and below, the streets begin their early shuffle. The clop of sandals, the bleating of goats, and the first shouts from vendors reassembling their stalls. The city doesn't exactly leap to life. It unfolds, like a reed mat unrolling across time. You make your way down the stairs and into the street, pausing at a corner to watch a group of workers already hard at it, hauling bricks, repairing a damaged drain, arguing over the placement of the support beam. One of them, covered in mud up to his elbows, catches your glance and smirks. "You're walking like your bones are made of papyrus." You laugh and reply, "Feels like it." The man chuckles and waves you on. "Better get moving, the morning heat won't wait." Mainstream historical fact. Babylonian cities, particularly in the later periods, began daily labor shortly after sunrise to avoid the punishing midday heat. Workers would break for food and rest by noon, sometimes returning in the late afternoon. Historians still argue whether certain jobs, like scribes and merchants, followed temple-regulated schedules or self-organized around seasonal conditions. You veer into a shaded alley, the sun not quite reaching its cobbled center. A small figure darts across your path. It's a young girl, barefoot and fast, clutching what appears to be a doll made of knotted fabric and straw. She gives you a brief grin, then vanishes behind a reed curtain. Around the next bend, the scent of fresh dates and baking flour hits you like a hug. You pause at a food stall where an old man is flipping small cakes over a clay griddle. He nods at you without pausing his work. "First time seeing date cakes?" You admit it is. He gestures for you to sit on a low stool as he slides one of the cakes onto a leaf and hands it over. You bite in. Crispy edge, warm center, sticky sweet dates melting in your mouth. You close your eyes. This might be your favorite part of the whole Babylonian experiment so far. The old man grins, sweet enough to make a priest confess. Quirky tidbit.
Date cakes were a popular treat in ancient Mesopotamia. One of the earliest known cookbooks, written on clay tablets, includes recipes using dates, nuts, milk, and flour. Some were steamed, some baked. Historians still argue whether these confections were eaten daily or reserved for religious offerings and festivals. You thank the vendor and keep walking, licking sticky date syrup from your fingers. As the city brightens, you notice a line forming near a small square building. It's not a temple and it's not a shop. It's a bathhouse. Now, you haven't exactly bathed since you arrived in Babylon, and no offense to the historical experience, but you are 100% ripe. So, in the name of history and hygiene, you join the queue. Inside, the bathhouse is simple but efficient. There's a changing area, a washing space with large ceramic basins, and a few attendants walking around with wooden ladles and coarse cloths. The air is thick with steam and spiced oils. One man hums while scrubbing his back with something that looks suspiciously like a turtle shell. Mainstream historical fact. Public bathhouses existed in ancient Mesopotamian cities, although they were smaller and simpler than Roman counterparts. They often doubled as social spaces and occasionally used aromatic oils in place of soap. Historians still argue whether such facilities were communal by necessity or a sign of early urban health practices. You strip down, scoop water from a basin, and pour it over yourself. The water's cool but refreshing. You scrub at your arms with a chunk of salt and a flat stone handed to you by an attendant who nods approvingly at your clumsy technique. Nearby, two men debate loudly whether a flood near Nippur was a sign from Enlil or just bad canal maintenance.
One insists, the omens were clear. 3 birds flew east, then west, then vanished. The other scoffs. Or maybe someone just forgot to clear the reeds from the aqueduct. You sigh happily, clean and entertained. You linger a while, drying off with a rough cloth and dressing slowly, before stepping back into the city that now seems sharper, crisper. Or maybe you're just no longer sweating fermented barley from your pores. The sun is climbing fast now, and with it, the streets are bustling again. You pass a woman selling trinkets, necklaces made of painted clay, carved bone charms, little tablets with cuneiform love notes etched into them. You pick one up. It reads, "When I see you, my heart blooms like barley in spring." You glance at the vendor. She winks, guaranteed to make someone kiss you. You laugh, place it gently back, and keep moving. Quirky tidbit. Mesopotamian culture was rich in poetic expression, and love poetry often found its way onto small clay tablets, especially in urban markets. Some were bought as tokens of affection, others as charms. Historians still argue whether these love tablets were mass-produced for tourists, yes, even in 1750 BCE, or made individually by hopeful scribes. You pass the ziggurat again, the sunlight now hitting its uppermost levels in blazing gold. The priests are already halfway up the staircase, robes fluttering like pale flags. And you, still a bit damp, date-fed and clean, pause beneath its looming shadow, breathing in the blend of dust, incense, and ancient ambition. Babylon is awake, and so are you. You wander deeper into the market district now, fully alert and perhaps a little too proud of your squeaky clean status. The early morning haze has burned off, and the streets have turned into a slow-moving current of traders, oxen, donkeys, and carts, all blending into the rhythm of Babylon's commercial heart. It's overwhelming at first. Sounds, smells, colors, all jostling for your attention. Clay jars full of olive oil catch the light like amber. Strings of dried fish dangle from awnings. A woman haggles over dyed wool, gesturing wildly as if her honor depends on the outcome. You sidestep a camel that snorts in your direction with utter disdain. It's commerce, pure and unfiltered. But beneath the noise, there's a method to the madness. You pass a tall man balancing a basket of figs on his head while barking orders at 2 small boys chasing after a runaway goat. Across from him, a scribe sits at a low table,
copying something onto a clay tablet, while glancing up every few seconds at a group of shouting men, traders it seems, waving tokens and pointing at a crude chart scratched in the dirt. Mainstream historical fact: Babylon was a hub of commerce in the ancient world. It had regulated marketplaces, complex trade systems, and used cuneiform tablets to record transactions. Tokens and seals were common tools for accounting. Historians still argue whether these early records reflect pure economic exchange or also served bureaucratic or religious oversight. You find yourself watching an impromptu auction. A man with a booming voice, more theater than sales, holds up an ornate jug, claiming it once belonged to the personal wine servant of the great Hammurabi himself. The crowd laughs, some boo, but a few raise their hands to bid. You suspect that jug has belonged to many historical figures today. A boy sidles up beside you with a tray of flatbread and a hopeful expression. You trade him a copper coin you picked up earlier, and he grins like you've made his week. The bread is dry, chewy, and somehow still satisfying. You tear off chunks as you wander, past booths with colorful textiles, carved wooden animals, and even one booth selling what appear to be homemade board games. Grids scratched into tablets with little pebbles for pieces. Quirky tidbit: the ancient game of discovered in a royal tomb from the Mesopotamian city of the same name, was popular across the region, including Babylon. It involved dice, strategy, and a bit of luck. Historians still argue whether the game was primarily for fun, gambling, or had ritual significance. A vendor notices your interest and waves you over. He offers to teach you the rules, for a price, of course. You politely decline, though he tosses you a game piece anyway, a tiny carved lion, as a gift for a lucky traveler. You thank him and tuck it into your belt.
Further along, the smell of roasting meat draws your attention to a small group seated around a portable grill. A man flips skewers of something that might be lamb, might be pigeon. You're not about to interrogate it. One of the diners gestures at an empty spot beside him, and you accept, easing down onto a reed mat that smells faintly of cumin and sweat. You listen to them chat. They're traders from Mari, here for spices and copper. One complains about the rising cost of barley. Another grumbles that his caravan's best donkey caught a spirit and refuses to walk in a straight line. They laugh, and you join in at the right moments. Then comes a moment of stillness. The food is ready. Charred, crisped meat wrapped in flatbread and dipped into a sauce that tastes of garlic, vinegar, and crushed seeds. It's absolutely divine. One of the men wipes his mouth and leans back, sighing. "This is the best part of trade," he says. "Not the coin, the stories." He gestures to you. "Where are you from?" You freeze. He narrows his eyes. "Not Akkadian, not Elamite either." "Far," you say simply, and that seems to satisfy him. He grins. "Then welcome, stranger. May your camels never spit and your ledgers never lie." A toast, apparently. Mainstream historical fact: Babylon's merchants were among the most well-traveled people of their time, forging trade networks that reached across Mesopotamia, into Anatolia, and even to the Indus Valley. Markets were places of business, certainly, but also of diplomacy and cultural exchange. Historians still argue whether these connections were always peaceful or veiled in economic exploitation. You spend some time in their company before parting ways with a full belly and 2 new curses for camels that you'll likely never use. Your feet take you toward a quieter part of the district now, narrow alleys with polished doorways and painted lintels. These are the shops of specialists, scribes, perfumers, jewelers, and what appears to be an early version of a bank? Inside, a man with ink-stained fingers is stacking small clay tablets onto a shelf, each one marked with lines of cuneiform. Another man, nervous and sweaty, is signing over what appears to be a livestock loan. Quirky tidbit: Babylonian temples and private institutions operated as early banks. offering loans, often with high interest, in the form of silver, grain, or livestock. Collateral was common, and defaulting could result in the loss of land or property. Historians still argue whether debt forgiveness proclamations, like Hammurabi's, were actual policies or more political theater than practice. You glance at a tablet lying nearby. It reads something like, 3 goats borrowed to be repaid after the harvest, interest of 1 lamb per month. You wince. That's steep. The scribe notices you staring and winks. No goats? No problem. Just leave your sandals as collateral. You laugh nervously and step back into the sun. Babylon's economy, you realize, isn't just bricks and barley. It's brains. It's loopholes. It's people doing their best to balance divine will, market forces, and the daily gamble of feeding their families. The breeze picks up again, carrying with it the scent of fresh reeds and the distant call of temple horns. You pocket the carved lion. Not bad for a morning, and there's still a whole afternoon to survive. The sun is now sliding lazily toward its zenith, and with it comes that slow, simmering heat that presses down on your shoulders like a sleepy ox. The crowd thins just a little. Those who can are finding shade or ducking indoors, and you're starting to understand why. Babylon at noon is not for the faint of heart or the poorly hydrated. You wander toward the river. Even from several blocks away, you can hear it murmuring behind the walls of reed and brick. The Euphrates is the lifeline of the city, and you are drawn to it like a lizard to a cool rock. Along the way, you pass a row of houses, wealthier ones now, you can tell. High walls, colored tiles, even a little painted ivy along the edges of the door frames. One house has a stone lion by the entrance, its face long eroded into something that looks halfway between proud and sleepy. You wonder who lives behind those doors. A merchant prince? A priestess with a penchant for strong perfume and stronger politics?
Mainstream historical fact. Wealthy Babylonians often lived in multi-room homes centered around an open courtyard, with dedicated spaces for worship, guests, and business. Walls were sometimes decorated with mosaics or painted plaster. Historians still argue whether ownership of such homes was inherited through family lines or primarily earned through temple or trade connections. You drift past a perfumery next. A woman fans a bundle of herbs over a clay brazier, releasing a trail of fragrant smoke. She waves the smoke toward your face with the same seriousness as a modern-day salesperson handing out samples at a department store. You inhale. It smells like rosemary and something sweet, maybe crushed dates. She smirks. You smell like fish and fire. You raise an eyebrow. She gestures to a small bowl. Try this, my own blend. You dab a bit behind your ears. It tingles. You immediately sneeze. She cackles with glee. Quirky tidbit. Perfume making in Babylon involved complex processes using crushed flowers, resins, oils, and even animal fats. Some perfumes were made as temple offerings, while others were reserved for courtship or ritual cleansing. Historians still argue whether these recipes were passed down orally within families or standardized by temple scribes. You thank her and continue on, slightly more fragrant now, and possibly allergic to ancient clove. The streets here begin to slope gently downward, and soon you see it. The Euphrates, wide and slow, glittering under the sun like melted silver. Its banks are alive with activity. Men are hauling water in animal skin sacks. Women are washing laundry on smooth stones. A few children are daring enough to splash at the edge, shrieking when a muddy current pulls at their feet. You find a shady spot beneath a fig tree and sit. The river smells earthy and clean, touched with the faint scent of algae and silt. Somewhere nearby, a reed flute plays, light, wistful, like the musical version of drowsiness. You watch a barge drift by, loaded with barrels and baskets, its captain lazily steering with a long pole while chewing on something green and leafy. A goose walks across your foot without apology. Mainstream historical fact. The Euphrates was not just Babylon's water source, it was its superhighway. Boats carried goods, people, and messages between cities. The river was managed through canals and locks, and major floods were recorded in omen texts. Historians still argue whether early flood control systems were advanced for their time or more reactionary than planned. You wander to a pier and watch two boys toss a line into the river. One has a clay jug tied to his waist, presumably for any lucky catch. They nod at you but stay focused. One yells suddenly, "Got one," and both begin tugging at the line. The fish turns out to be an old sandal. They look at each other in silence, then burst into laughter so loud even the barge captain joins in from mid-river. You shake your head, grinning. Farther along, a man in robes is conducting what appears to be a small ritual at the riverbank. He pours water from a bronze bowl, murmurs a few words, then tosses a bundle of herbs into the current. You keep a respectful distance, but your curiosity gnaws at you. An elderly woman nearby notices and leans in. "He's giving thanks to Enki," she says, "for safe passage. His son is heading to Dilmun tomorrow." You nod, pretending you definitely know where Dilmun is. Quirky tidbit: Enki, the Sumerian god of water, wisdom, and creation, remained an important deity in Babylon. Rituals at rivers often involved symbolic purification, offerings of fish or herbs, and prayers for safe travel. Historians still argue whether these recipes were passed down orally within families or standardized by temple scribes. You start to feel the heaviness of the day now, not just from the sun, but from everything. The rhythm of the city, the food still digesting in your belly, the warm perfume lingering on your neck. It's all so wonderfully boring in that ancient, sacred way. You feel full, not just of flatbread and date cakes, but of memory, of time, of dust and noise and laughter, and sandals fished from rivers. You close your eyes for just a moment, maybe two. When you open them again, the light has shifted, sharper now, hinting that the peak of the day has passed. You've napped a little without realizing. A goat has curled up beside you, no idea who you are, and clearly not caring. You scratch behind its ear, and it snorts approvingly.
Time to move again. You rise slowly, shaking off the dream dust, and follow the riverbank until it leads you back toward the hum of the city. The streets are waking up once more. Vendors return to their stalls. Shutters are thrown open. Children run with sticks, and bells chime from the temple far away. The afternoon in Babylon is beginning. And you're still here, still alive, still full of questions. Like, what does an accountant in 1750 BCE actually do? You make a mental note to find out. You follow the steady thrum of feet and the lazy rhythm of donkey carts back toward the administrative heart of the city. By now, the midday heat has shifted, no longer oppressive, just sticky, and the breeze carries dust that sticks faintly to your perfumed neck, which now smells less like exotic oils and more like roasted herbs in a very fancy soup. Still, you press on. Your goal? Babylon's scribal district, the home of the elite number crunchers, record keepers, and bureaucratic wizards who managed everything from taxes to temple grain to how many goats one neighbor owed another after an unfortunate wall collapse. You pass through a smaller plaza, one flanked by squat buildings with carved lintels and painted doorways. Reed mats hang in some doorways to keep out the worst of the flies. One open courtyard reveals a class in progress. Young boys, no older than 10, squinting at clay tablets while their instructor paces slowly, a stick in hand. The instructor doesn't strike anyone, but he taps his own palm rhythmically, just as a reminder. Mainstream historical fact: education in ancient Babylon, especially for scribes, began early. Boys from elite or wealthy families were sent to tablet houses, aduba, or house of tablets, where they trained for years in writing, math, and legal precedent. Historians still argue whether girls received comparable education. Evidence remains sparse and debated. One poor kid drops his stylus, and another snorts with laughter, earning a scowl from the teacher. You keep walking. The smell of baked clay and crushed reed fills the air as you turn a corner into the real engine room of Babylon, the scribal quarter. Here, adults sit hunched at low tables under shaded awnings.
Some etch carefully onto fresh tablets, others carefully wrap completed ones in cloth or place them into clay jars. You spot one fellow gently blowing dust from a just-finished tablet like it's a birthday cake. He looks up at you, eyes narrowing with interest, or maybe suspicion. You step closer. You need a loan document, marriage contract, omen chart? His voice is dry as old papyrus, but not unkind. Just watching, you say. He grunts, then gestures to a stool. Sit then. Don't lean on the table. These take hours. You obey, and as he works, you watch his hand move with the confidence of a man who has written 1 sheep, 2 goat about 6,000 times in his life. His stylus, a sharp reed, moves deftly through soft clay, each wedge-shaped impression adding to a system older than most myths. Mainstream historical fact. Cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script used in Babylon, evolved from pictographs and became the writing system for everything from trade receipts to poetry. It was written on clay tablets, which were then sun-dried or baked for permanence. Historians still argue whether cuneiform's complexity was a barrier to mass literacy or simply the price of administrative elegance. You glance around. Another scribe nearby is translating a letter, muttering softly as he does. To my brother in Ur, fields remain dry. Tell father we need more silver. The clay crackles slightly under his stylus. Then a surprise. Laughter. Real belly-deep laughter from a group seated around a large table stacked with tablets. Curious, you drift over. Another court dispute, someone asks. A woman, yes, a woman, leans back and grins. Worse, a man suing his neighbor because the neighbor's goat insulted his wife's cooking. The table bursts into snorts and snickers. Quirky tidbit, Babylonian legal tablets contain not only serious court rulings, but also the occasional absurd or petty complaint. Disputes over foul-mouthed parrots, stolen sandals, or dishonorable livestock have surfaced in translated records. Historians still argue whether these more humorous cases were exceptions or part of a broader everyday justice system. You're invited to peek at the tablet. Sure enough, the wedge marks spell out something like, "The goat belonging to Shamash Nasir entered the home of Lilumat, consumed sacred barley, and bleated impure words during the meal."
You can't decide what's better, the goat's behavior, or the fact someone took the time to document it on clay, then file it. One of the scribes stretches, stands, and offers you a cracked cup of something murky and cool. It tastes like watered-down beer with a hint of mint. Refreshing, if a little gritty. You sit for a while, letting the quiet rhythm of styluses tapping clay lull you. It's soothing in a bureaucratic, tax season kind of way. Then someone new enters, a tall man with shoulders that scream temple accountant or maybe former wrestler turned ledger expert. He slaps a scroll, yes, a scroll, onto the table. "Royal audit," he announces. Everyone groans in unison. You suppress a smile. Apparently, even in Babylon, the phrase audit can suck the joy out of a room. The scroll is actually a rolled tablet wrapped in a linen cloth. Carefully, it's unrolled and examined. A log of grain tithes, temple offerings, market levies, and even a list of fines collected for spitting in public during sacred festivals. There's some side commentary about missing silver, but no one wants to say it aloud. Mainstream historical fact, Babylonian record-keeping included extensive taxation documents and religious tithes, often processed through temple institutions. Temples operated as banks, administrative centers, and tax collectors. Historians still argue whether the temple's economic power rivaled or reinforced the king's rule. The scribes fall into debate. Should a half offering of grain be rounded up or taxed separately? Was the missing silver miscounted, misappropriated, or misrecorded? You sit back and enjoy the show.
These aren't just number guys. They're mathematicians, lawyers, poets, and maybe even philosophers, buried beneath robes and dried clay. The work they do, mundane as it seems, holds the entire city together. Without them, no temples, no markets, no clean drinking water. Just goats running wild, bleating profanities. You stand to leave, offering thanks. One scribe tosses you a small practice tablet, soft clay with a few impressions already started. Try your luck, he says. See if you're scribe material. You nod solemnly, then promptly drop it. The scribe stares, then grins. You're a natural bureaucrat. You bow, dust off your now slightly clay-smeared tunic, and step back into the light. The streets are warmer now, but your mind is buzzing. You have just survived a Babylonian bureaucracy sprint, and you didn't even get fined. Somewhere in the distance, a goat bleats with suspicious sarcasm. You grin and walk toward the sound. You leave the scribal quarter with the faint scent of wet clay still clinging to your hands, even though you didn't actually write anything. That little practice tablet now lives somewhere behind you, resting gently on a floor you definitely did not drop it on. Bureaucracy has never felt so tactile or so easy to accidentally destroy. The afternoon light has gone golden. Shadows stretch out like sleepy cats across the paving stones, and the city starts shifting into a slower rhythm. Babylon doesn't stop exactly. It just exhales. Your stomach reminds you that it's been hours since your last date cake. You need a snack, and maybe a little entertainment. That's how you find yourself drawn toward the edge of the temple district again, where the streets widen slightly and the scent of spiced wine and roasted chickpeas lingers in the air. You follow your nose and the occasional shout of, "No, you cheated," toward a low, shaded courtyard where people are gathered around what appears to be a competitive board game. Yes, Babylon had board games, and people were serious about them. Mainstream historical fact. The game of an ancient race-based board game, was popular in Mesopotamia for centuries. It involved a mixture of strategy and chance played with dice-like tetrahedrons. Historians still argue whether it was primarily a gambling pastime, a religious ritual, or a mix of both. You edge closer and see the familiar grid-like board with 2 rows of squares and small carved pieces, some shaped like lions, others like rosettes or stylized birds. 2 players sit opposite one another, focused like gladiators, surrounded by a peanut gallery of loud, slightly tipsy spectators. One of the players slaps a piece down dramatically. You're offered a seat on a low stool and a handful of something crunchy, roasted lentils mixed with cumin. They're oddly addictive. Someone hands you a cup of something that tastes vaguely like fermented pomegranate juice. Slightly sour, slightly fizzy, entirely refreshing. Quirky tidbit. Ancient Babylonians brewed a surprising variety of drinks beyond just beer. Fermented date wine, pomegranate juice, and even barley sodas made appearances at both religious festivals and everyday gatherings. Historians still argue whether these drinks were consumed purely for pleasure or had ritual significance in certain contexts. The game continues, and the atmosphere feels uncannily familiar. You've seen this before, at poker nights, chess tournaments, and that one Monopoly game that destroyed a friendship in under 2 hours. People laugh, shout, flirt, gossip. One guy keeps trying to sneak extra pieces onto the board until he gets swatted with a rolled-up fan. It's utterly human and weirdly calming. You wonder how many afternoons like this have played out in this very spot. Thousands? Tens of thousands? Your contemplation is interrupted by a man in a tall felt hat who loudly proclaims that he will now perform epic poetry while juggling bread rolls. It's unclear if this is rehearsed or if he just finished drinking his weight in barley ale, but either way, everyone's in. He climbs onto a low platform, possibly an old storage crate, and begins.
His poem is a dramatic retelling of a man's failed attempt to woo a priestess, involving a stolen chicken, 2 left sandals, and a very angry ox. The juggling is inconsistent. One bread roll hits you gently in the shin. No one minds. This is entertainment, Babylon style. Mainstream historical fact. Storytelling and performance were integral to Babylonian social life. Poets and musicians often entertained in public spaces, taverns, and temples. Some recitations were mythic, others comic or satirical. Historians still argue whether public performance was reserved for sacred occasions or a staple of everyday life. The poem ends with a fake death scene, dramatic, slow motion, involving a lot of groaning and one final toss of a now slightly dusty bread roll. The crowd applauds. The juggler takes a bow. A dog steals the roll and runs off into the street. You smile. You're still full from your earlier feast, but this is dessert. You wander onward, letting the noises fade behind you. The light is dimming now. The city begins its gentle transition into twilight. Street vendors start packing up their wares, some counting silver rings carefully, others just tipping leftover lentils into small bowls for kids and passing dogs. You turn down a quieter street and find yourself near what appears to be a small private garden. A few wealthy homes here have interior courtyards with plants, shallow pools, and even the occasional painted fresco. The door to one courtyard stands open. You hesitate, then peek inside. A young woman lounges on a low bench, reading from a clay tablet lit by oil lamp. She glances up, smiles briefly, and waves you in. "You like riddles?" she asks. You nod. Who doesn't? She reads aloud. "I stand tall in the sun, but I drink with no mouth. I sleep in the dark, yet I wake when cut down." You pause, think. "It's a plant?" She smirks. "Palm tree. You're close." You grin sheepishly. Quirky tidbit. Babylonian riddles, some preserved on ancient tablets, were popular both as entertainment and as teaching tools. Many involved metaphors drawn from daily life, plants, animals, tools, or even gods. Historians still argue whether riddles held hidden religious meaning or purely recreational. The woman offers you a sweet, a tiny morsel of honeyed fig wrapped in a sliver of date leaf. You accept it, chewing slowly as the flavors melt across your tongue. She goes back to her tablet, and you take your leave. Back on the street, the lanterns are being lit. Oil lamps flicker from doorways, casting warm, dappled patterns on the cobblestones. The air smells of earth and smoke, and yes, still a trace of that riverbank perfume from earlier. You pass a musician plucking a lyre under a wooden awning. The song is soft and old, and maybe even a little sad. No one sings. They just listen. You pause too. And for a moment, the city holds still. In this golden hour, this edge between day and night, Babylon feels more like a dream than a place too old to remember, too real to forget. And somehow, you're still part of it, not just surviving, but living. And tomorrow, you'll seek out a healer. You do, after all, have a goat bite to look into.
You wake the next morning to the familiar sounds of the city stretching its limbs. Clay shutters creak open. Children's laughter ricochets off walls. Somewhere nearby, someone is already yelling about lentil prices. Your ankle itches. You look down. Ah, yes, the goat bite. A small, purplish bruise now surrounds 2 tiny punctures. It doesn't hurt that much, but it definitely didn't vanish overnight either. Time to do what any sensible time traveler in ancient Babylon would do: find a healer. You limp slightly down the street, keeping an eye out for any signs, figurative or literal, of a practitioner. There's no neon green cross, obviously. No waiting room magazine rack. But eventually, you notice a stall with rows of tiny ceramic jars, bundles of dried herbs, and a woman with arms dusted in powdered clay and something that smells like garlic. She's not dressed like a priestess or a market vendor. Her tunic is simple, her hair braided with strands of copper, and her eyes narrow as she examines your leg. "You've been bitten by someone's lunch," she says dryly.
You explain, well, mime, mostly, that it was a goat. She seems unconvinced. Mainstream historical fact. Babylonian medicine was a fusion of practical herbal remedies and deeply rooted spiritual beliefs. Healers often combined observable treatments, like poultices, bandages, and surgical tools, with incantations to drive out malevolent spirits believed to cause illness. Historians still argue whether these healers were closer to scientists or priests. She beckons you to sit, then cracks open a clay jar, scooping out a pungent gray paste that smells suspiciously like onion, beer, and ash. She smears it gently over the wound while muttering something rhythmic, half lullaby, half threat, directed perhaps at the goat or at the spirit of infection itself. You don't interrupt. Quirky tidbit. One real Babylonian remedy for wounds involved mixing crushed turtle shell with myrrh and beer. It wasn't just about healing. It was about symbolism. The turtle shell represented protection. The beer, connection to the goddess Ninkasi. Historians still argue whether such symbolic ingredients were meant to influence divine favor or had any measurable medicinal effect. She wraps your ankle with a strip of linen so clean it probably came from temple stores, then blows lightly on the dressing, as if sealing it in with a charm. "You'll live," she says, then hands you a tiny talisman, an oddly shaped stone carved with a symbol you don't recognize. It's warm somehow, even though it came from a basket. Payment is tricky. You're fresh out of silver rings. But when you pantomime sweeping or hauling jars, she shakes her head and gestures toward a young apprentice already grinding herbs with the tired aggression of someone on day 6 of an unpaid internship. Instead, she points to a shallow basket of herbs and makes a drinking motion. You understand. Trade. Barter. You head back out and manage, after far more effort than you'd like to admit, to haggle 3 bundles of licorice root from a nearby vendor by mimicking a goat bite and pointing at your leg repeatedly. The healer seems satisfied with the exchange. Your ankle wrapped, your spirit slightly restored, you find yourself with a bit of time before the midday sun turns the streets into frying pans. You wander into one of the quieter alleys near the river, where long shadows keep the walls cool and small niches house family shrines, statues of protective gods, and, occasionally, a stray chicken. You pause at one of the larger doorways. Carved into the frame is the faint figure of a winged deity, either a guardian spirit or a very fashion-forward god of wind. You're not sure. Above the door, you spot the clay seal of ownership, 3 cuneiform marks pressed into a circular tablet. This, you realize, is a household. Not a palace or a market, just someone's home. No one stops you when you wander through the open gate into the outer courtyard. You spot a woman scrubbing clay bowls while humming a tune you recognized from the lyre song last night. A boy chases a cat with what looks like a frog on a string. Someone's failing to teach a parrot to say pomegranate. Domestic life. Quiet, messy, oddly familiar. Mainstream historical fact. The average Babylonian home consisted of multiple rooms around a central courtyard. These spaces were multifunctional, used for cooking, washing, sleeping, and worship. Historians still argue whether extended families lived communally or if nuclear households were more common in urban centers.
You're invited in. The woman gestures for you to sit under a palm frond awning where the breeze smells faintly of clay and dates. She offers a small dish of soft cheese and a smear of fig jam on flatbread. It's tangy and sweet, comfort food, ancient edition. A small shrine sits in the corner, tiny clay figures nestled among petals and incense ash. One of the children mimes washing her hands before gesturing reverently to the figures. You mimic her movements. Respect is universal. Quirky tidbit. Babylonian households often honored protective household deities, such as Lamassu, winged guardians, or Gula, the healing goddess. Families sometimes buried tiny statues under doorways or placed them on household altars.
Historians still argue whether these rituals were truly personal beliefs or social customs maintained through peer pressure and fear of misfortune. Conversation drifts among the family. You don't catch most of it, but the rhythm feels familiar. Who forgot to fetch water? Who tripped over the goat? Who left the courtyard gate open so the neighbor's sheep wandered in and ate half the laundry? Every home, every era has its stories. You stay longer than you mean to. The cheese is soft, the air is gentle, and the noise of the city feels distant here. You start to drift, just a little, before a loud sneeze from the parrot jolts you back into the present. Time to keep moving. You rise, thank your hosts with a bow, and head back toward the street. The sun is stronger now, shadows sharper. But your ankle feels a little better. Whether from onion paste, turtle magic, or placebo, you're not sure. But you'll take the win. As you step back into the bustling world of Babylon, you tuck the little stone talisman into your pouch, just in case. You return to the streets of Babylon with a slight limp, a belly full of fig and cheese, and the faint scent of onions still clinging to your ankle. Honestly, it could be worse. The city is humming again, like a great animal stretching in the midday heat. The shout of merchants, the clatter of pottery, the splash of water being dumped from windows, it's all back at full volume. You squint toward the ziggurat, rising stoic and monolithic in the heat haze. From this distance, it looks less like a structure and more like a stairway melted by the sun. Your eyes catch a flicker of motion, bright colors, rhythmic movements. You follow the sound of music, winding your way toward a plaza not far from the Ishtar Gate. There, a crowd has gathered around a group of dancers. The beat is soft but steady. Hand drums, clappers, something that sounds like finger cymbals. A line of dancers, mostly women, but a few men, sway in unison. Their movements are mesmerizing, shoulders undulating like reeds in the wind, arms carving shapes in the air. Anklets of bronze chime with every step. Mainstream historical fact: music and dance were crucial components of Babylonian festivals and rituals. Performers were often trained in temple complexes and played during religious ceremonies, funerals, harvest celebrations, and even military parades. Historians still argue whether certain movements carried sacred meanings or simply expressions of joy and storytelling. You sit on the edge of a fountain, the stone warm beneath you. A young boy offers you a skewer of candied tamarind, sticky and sour sweet. You buy two, one for you and one for you in about 5 minutes when the first one vanishes. As you watch, you notice a pattern in the dance, repeating motifs. A raised arm, a spinning turn, a downward sweep, almost like letters being drawn with the body. A woman beside you leans over and whispers, "It's the flood story. See? That's Ea opening the deep." You blink. That sweeping motion? It did look like a wave. She explains that many traditional dances tell stories, some of the gods, others of everyday events. There's a whole dance about brewing beer, apparently, which involves miming burping and sleeping. Quirky tidbit: some Babylonian dance instructors were so respected they were considered essential members of temple staff, on par with scribes or diviners. Dancers often passed their knowledge through generations, sometimes using clay tablets etched with stick figure choreography. Historians still argue whether these dances were encoded religious messages or simply a memory aid for performance. A final spin ends the performance, and the dancers freeze perfectly still. The crowd claps in that polite, overly enthusiastic way that says, "We don't know what that meant, but it was definitely impressive."
The dancers bow. A few drop into relaxed stretches, and the musicians begin packing up. You linger, licking your fingers clean of tamarind syrup. You turn to thank the woman next to you, but she's already wandered off into the market. Behind you, the scent of incense wafts from a small shrine alcove tucked between two buildings. You walk toward it, drawn by the flickering of oil lamps. Inside, a woman kneels in quiet prayer before a statue of Nanshe, the goddess of justice and divination. Offerings of flour, figs, and tiny carved fishes line the altar. You pause respectfully, keeping to the back. Mainstream historical fact: Nanshe, originally a Sumerian goddess, was adopted into Babylonian religion. She was known as a protector of the oppressed, a judge of dreams, and a helper of widows and orphans. Temples dedicated to her were often places of refuge. Historians still argue whether her cult maintained independent power or was gradually absorbed into the worship of larger deities like Marduk or Ishtar. You leave a small piece of candied tamarind beside the altar. It's probably not canonically approved, but hey, it's the best you've got. You continue on your way, pulled now toward the docks by the distant thrum of activity. Boats line the canal like patient beasts, their hulls loaded with clay jars, bundles of reeds, crates of figs, and at least one very bored sheep. You lean on a wooden post and watch as workers unload goods under the supervision of a very loud, very sweaty man with arms like tree trunks. He's directing traffic using a combination of shouting, whistling, and interpretive eyebrow dance. One barge carries massive sacks labeled with small stamped seals. Barley, maybe? Another offloads dyed fabrics, so bright they practically glow in the sunlight. Rich purples, deep crimsons, a shade of blue that almost hums. Quirky tidbit: Babylon imported a variety of luxury goods through its extensive trade network, including indigo dye from India, cedar wood from Lebanon, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Traders often traveled thousands of miles over land and river, guided by seasonal winds, star charts, and the promise of silver. Historians still argue whether trade routes were organized by central governance or by powerful private merchant families. You try not to look suspicious as you stroll the edge of the dock. You imagine you must stick out, limping slightly, smelling like onions and fig jam, and holding a melted tamarind stick. A man offers you a ride on a small barge headed upriver. You decline. One goat attack per trip is enough. Instead, you follow the waterline to a quieter edge of the canal, where people are lounging under awnings, some fishing, others playing a game that involves flicking stones at concentric rings drawn in the dust. You try once. Miss by a full arm's length. A 10-year-old beats you with casual cruelty. You think of all the people flowing in and out of this city. Merchants, priests, dancers, dock workers, parrot chasers, scribes, stonemasons, storytellers. It's all so alive, so real. And yet somehow the rhythm of it is peaceful, predictable in its unpredictability. You walk back through the marketplace as the sun begins to sink, its light now rich and amber, like honey poured from the heavens. A woman selling pressed flower oil pats your arm and hands you a sample. You smell lavender and something earthy. You smell slightly less like goat now. A street musician begins a slow, plucked tune on a lyre. The crowd around him doesn't speak. They just listen. Even the birds pause their squabbling for a beat. You sit at the edge of a low step, feet aching, shoulders warm, breath slowing. For a moment, you close your eyes and hear only the music, the river, and your own heart. You have survived another day in Babylon. You're getting good at this. Your ankles are sore, your stomach is content, and the sun is preparing to dip behind the ziggurat's towering silhouette like it's clocking out for the night. Babylon, however, is just shifting gears. You didn't expect this city to have a nightlife, but here you are, watching the torches being lit one by one along the main avenues, casting golden flickers on glazed brick walls. You wander through twilight like a slow-moving shadow. The heat is finally loosening its grip, and a welcome breeze rides the river. Somewhere nearby, a flute begins a meandering tune, and laughter follows. Not wild or rowdy, but the soft, tired kind that comes after a long day and a good meal.
You turn a corner into what looks like a narrow residential lane, lined with small homes tucked close together. Here, Babylon feels more like a village. You pass open doorways where families sit sharing dates and stories, where flickering lamps reveal shelves of clay tablets and small carved animals. A dog trots past you, carrying what you sincerely hope is not someone's sandal. Mainstream historical fact. Babylonian homes were organized around shared courtyards, and many evening hours were spent in communal spaces. Storytelling, music, and recitations from memory helped pass the time, especially during the cooler evening hours. Historians still argue whether these communal gatherings acted as informal educational spaces or simply leisure. You're invited to join a group sitting on woven mats outside a modest house. There's food, always food, and someone's roasting chickpeas in a pan over coals. The scent makes your stomach perk up, even though you were sure you couldn't eat another bite. A young man pours beer into shallow ceramic cups. You accept yours with both hands, like you've seen others do, and offer a polite nod. This isn't the kind of beer you're used to. It's cloudy, grainy, and a bit sour, but not unpleasant. Definitely uncarbonated. Imagine a smoothie made of bread and regret. But you keep sipping. A woman, perhaps in her 40s, with laugh lines deep enough to hide secrets, begins telling a story. Her voice is rich and textured, as though the syllables themselves have been aged in clay jars. The group hushes as she speaks. You catch fragments, some words familiar now. A goddess who loses her necklace in the underworld, a farmer who angers a river god, a clever monkey who outwits a lion. Each tale is punctuated with small gasps, bursts of laughter, or approving hums. She isn't just narrating, she's performing. Every character lives in her hands and eyes. Quirky tidbit. Babylonian storytelling often included theatrical gestures, vocal inflections, and even musical accompaniment, using lyres or flutes. Some performers were officially recognized as oral scribes and were invited to entertain at both domestic feasts and temple festivals. Historians still argue whether these oral traditions predated cuneiform texts or evolved alongside them. You find yourself leaning in, lips parted slightly, drawn in despite only understanding about 60% of what's said. Maybe 45%, but somehow it doesn't matter. The cadence of the language, the gestures, the shared smiles, they carry more meaning than literal translation ever could. Eventually, the story winds to a close. The audience murmurs in appreciation. A few people slap their thighs in that very specific way people do when they're saying, "Well, that was something." The storyteller turns to you. "Your turn," she says, eyes twinkling. You panic for half a breath. But then you remember, stories aren't about perfection, they're about connection. You launch into a fumbled, animated version of Little Red Riding Hood, complete with howling, cape swooshing, and an exaggerated grandmother voice. They are delighted. Not necessarily by the story, although the wolf hiding in bed gets a huge laugh, but by you. Your commitment, your effort, your utter inability to say grandmother without sounding like you're sneezing. You're handed another cup of beer, possibly as a reward, possibly as a gentle hint to stop talking. The moon is up now, casting silver light across clay rooftops and turning the Euphrates into a ribbon of liquid steel. You wander back toward the river again, moving slowly, allowing your steps to echo just a bit in the cooling air. Babylon is quieter now, but not asleep. There's always something humming, a lullaby, a shuffle of sandals, the soft lap of water against stone. Mainstream historical fact. Babylon operated late into the evening, especially during festival times or periods of intense trade. Even after dark, scribes would continue work under oil lamps, and certain temples stayed active with night rituals and stargazing. Historians still argue whether Babylon's night culture was more vibrant than daytime due to the intense heat and shared communal rhythms. You pass a group of older men on a rooftop, pointing at constellations with sticks and arguing good-naturedly. You recognize one of the constellations, sort of. It looks like a scorpion or maybe a shrimp holding a trident. They're probably discussing omens. You give them a respectful nod. One waves you up.
You climb the narrow stairs and join them, seated on a reed mat with a view of the whole city. Babylon by starlight is something else. Flickering lamps stretch out like fireflies scattered on a gridded field. You can see the dark outline of the ziggurat against the sky, and beyond it, only desert and stars. They offer you dates and dried fish, again with the generosity, and begin discussing the stars.
One man uses a tiny stylus to scratch notes into a wax tablet, muttering something about Venus and rainfall. Quirky tidbit: Babylonian astronomers were among the first to document planetary motions with surprising accuracy. They kept detailed records on clay tablets and predicted lunar eclipses and solstices centuries before more advanced tools existed. Historians still argue whether this knowledge was purely observational or tied deeply to religious prophecy and omen interpretation. You lie back and let the sound of stargazing debates swirl around you. Something about Jupiter being in a bad mood. Someone insists it means a good harvest. Another snorts and says it just means goats will act weird, which, based on your ankle, checks out. The stars above twinkle like they're in on the joke. You don't say much, just breathe. You've eaten street food, dodged a goat, received ancient medical care, watched traditional dances, listened to epics under the stars, and told your own fairy tale to a crowd of strangers. And now you're lying on a rooftop in ancient Babylon, belly full, spirit calm, with nothing but warm air and the slow drift of time around you. And still, somehow, you're not done. Tomorrow is waiting, just beyond the edge of sleep. At some point, someone places a light woven cloth over your legs. You barely notice. The breeze on the rooftop is gentle, but enough to bring a shiver if you're not tucked in. The older men continue their hushed stargazing murmurs around you, now sounding more like the low drone of insects in tall grass. You let their voices melt into the background hum, tonight's lullaby. Eventually, your rooftop companions rise, stretch, and file down the narrow steps. One gives you a knowing wink, as if to say, "You'll be fine here. The stars will keep you company." You sit up slowly, blinking at the lights of Babylon. They've dimmed, like the city is inhaling, holding its breath between day and whatever comes next. You decide to head back to your borrowed sleeping space near the warehouse, through lanes that now feel eerily still. No goats, no clamor, just dust, moonlight, and the distant splash of oars. You pass a tiny shrine tucked between two buildings. Its clay walls are painted with red and black stripes. Its niche holding a small weather-worn idol, maybe Ishtar, though she looks more like she's been through a few rough flood seasons. A small bowl holds burnt incense. You lean in and sniff. Smells like pine and goat again? Mainstream historical fact. Babylonian households often kept personal shrines to lesser-known deities or protective spirits. These weren't formal temples, but intimate spaces for daily offerings. Historians still argue whether these private practices were sanctioned by the state priesthood or tolerated as folk religion. You offer a silent nod to the idol, just in case. Can't hurt to hedge your bets with the gods, especially after today. By the time you reach your bedroll, the moon has started its descent, and a chill clings to the ground. You burrow into a pile of rough linens, still faintly scented with olive oil and dust. Your limbs feel twice their weight, your eyelids thick as clay. But just as you start to drift off, a low, rhythmic boom, boom, boom cuts through the silence. You freeze. Are those war drums? You poke your head up. A cluster of young men are approaching, each carrying hollow wooden cylinders that they thump with flat hands. Behind them, a group of women sing in unison, melodic, hypnotic, and definitely not lullaby material. Someone plays a long reed pipe. You squint. It's not war, it's a wedding. Of course, Babylonian weddings were not known for their brevity or subtlety. Quirky tidbit. Traditional Babylonian weddings could stretch over several days and nights, involving elaborate processions, gift exchanges, games, and ritual music. The groom's relatives sometimes paraded livestock or baskets of bread through the streets as part of the dowry display. Historians still argue whether the noise was celebratory or low-key competitive. Look how many sheep I brought. You sit up with a groan. The wedding party dances past you in a swirl of linen and laughter. One of the drummers tosses you a date. You catch it.
Barely. The bride is radiant in a layered white gown, though the hem is definitely dragging through something suspicious. Her veil is sheer, her kohl-lined eyes visible and fierce. She doesn't walk, she floats, held aloft by music, joy, and what looks like two cousins supporting her under each elbow. They pass, and the city settles once more. You lie back, date in hand. You're not even hungry anymore. But still, you eat it, because when Babylon gives you a date at 3 a.m., you take the date. You close your eyes, this time for real. Until, of course, dawn arrives like an overly enthusiastic messenger. A rooster belts its alarm from somewhere far too close to your head. You groan, roll over, and then sit up, because you remember, today's the final day. Your guide appears, impossibly chipper, holding a bowl of barley porridge and what might be a cup of leftover festival beer. You take the porridge. You eye the beer. You pass. Today's mission? Market trading. Again. But this time, you're not tagging along. You're participating. Congratulations! You're a Babylonian now. Sort of. You arrive at a mid-sized market in the southern quarter where the goods are a little less flashy and the prices less steep. It's a barter-heavy space filled with artisans, farmers, and the occasional shady-looking spice merchant who keeps sneezing into his cumin sacks. Mainstream historical fact: Babylon's marketplaces operated under a mix of barter and silver-based pricing. Scales were carefully regulated, and scribes sometimes sat nearby to record major exchanges or disputes. Historians still argue whether the state's involvement in local markets was primarily regulatory or deeply entwined with temple-controlled economic systems. You've been given something to trade, a polished obsidian pendant supposedly blessed by a priest. Your task? Trade it up. Not for money, for lunch. You start small. A potter admires the pendant and offers you a small jug of oil. The oil goes to a baker, who gives you a loaf of fig bread. The fig bread wins over a brewer's wife, who hands you a handful of dried fish and a wink that makes you blush. Eventually, through a flurry of increasingly absurd deals, including one that briefly involves a parrot and some honey, you land a meal. Grilled river fish wrapped in spiced leaves, a hunk of barley cake, and a pomegranate split in half like a jewel box. You sit on a low stone bench, savoring each bite. Across from you, a street performer juggles clay mugs while balancing a jug on his head. A small crowd claps politely, though one kid looks unimpressed, probably thinks he can do better. You lean back, full and satisfied. Babylon has changed you. Not in some cheesy, soul-searching travel blog way, but in the way that any place does when you've walked its streets, eaten its food, survived its goats, and felt it breathe around you. Tomorrow, you'll be gone. But tonight, you're still here. And Babylon, under this rising sun, is still very much alive. Your final hours in Babylon begin not with a bang or ceremony, but with a quiet walk. Just you, the faint smell of roasted chickpeas lingering in alleyways, and your dusty sandals skimming the ground like they've grown tired of being feet. Your guide gives you a nod that means we don't need to say much, which is perfect, because you don't have much left in your voice. The ziggurat looms nearby, casting its long morning shadow over the city. You realize it's not menacing, it's grounding. No matter how far people traveled or how lost they got in the labyrinth of Babylon's walls, they could look up and say, "Ah, there it is. I'm home." You find yourself weaving back toward the temple district, though this time you're not here for ceremony. It's more of a farewell lap. A few priests and acolytes bustle about. You spot the goat from earlier, yes, that goat, tethered now, chewing calmly like it never tried to sabotage your lower leg. Quirky tidbit: some temples kept mascot animals, considered sacred, not for sacrifice, but as companions to the gods. One temple was known to keep a particularly aggressive goose, which allegedly bit a high priest on the nose during a solstice ritual. Historians still argue whether the goose was later deified or just eaten out of spite.
You stop near the same fountain where you first washed off the desert road grime, where the air was filled with perfume and mystery. It's quieter now. A young girl carries water in a clay jug almost as big as she is. She gives you a toothy grin and stumbles off humming something that sounds like yesterday's wedding song. The ordinary moments are the ones that tug at you most now. The quiet laugh behind a curtain, the way someone adjusts a shoulder strap, the way dust catches sunlight in midair and looks like magic. You never really see those things until you're about to leave. Mainstream historical fact. Babylon's daily rhythms were so well documented in surviving cuneiform texts that modern scholars can reconstruct meal plans, shift work, and even laundry schedules. Historians still argue whether this hyper-documentation reflected true bureaucracy or was simply temple control over all aspects of life. Your guide walks you to the edge of the Ishtar Gate, its iconic lions watching you go. You pause at the base, running your fingers along the glazed blue bricks. You hadn't noticed it before, but the eyes of those lions, they're always watching forward, never back. You're handed a tiny clay token, unbaked, thumb-sized, etched with what looks like 2 overlapping stars. For the next journey, your guide says, you don't know whether it's a coin, a charm, or a way of saying goodbye. Maybe it's all 3. Now the sky has gone soft. That moment before sunset where everything turns amber and the shadows grow bold. You find a quiet rooftop. It's not the one from before, but it's close. Still smells like dust and sky, still catches the breeze off the Euphrates. You stretch out, arms behind your head, and let the city speak to you one last time. In the distance, flutes rise again. Someone's cooking something savory. You hear a child yell, followed by an adult scolding and the universal slap-slap of fleeing bare feet. The moon peeks over the horizon. The stars, your old rooftop companions, wink into place one by one. And here, beneath the hum of the world's first great city, you close your eyes. You're lying still now, the warm wind brushing softly against your cheeks like the edge of a silk curtain. Babylon continues on without you, lanterns flickering in narrow windows, lullabies whispered behind reed blinds, distant hooves clacking on stone. The world doesn't stop, but your part in it slows breath by breath. Let your body feel heavier, not weighed down, but grounded, as though you've become part of the earth beneath those ancient bricks. Your legs remember walking miles of dusty streets. Your arms remember the shape of unfamiliar bowls. And your heart remembers being fully awake in a world long gone. That gentle ringing in your ears? Maybe it's the sound of temple bells, or just your own blood slowing to the rhythm of sleep. Let it all fade now. The sharp edges of history soften, the arguments of scholars become whispers on the breeze. Even that opinionated goose from the temple courtyard has settled into a feathery sigh. You are safe. You are still. You are far from everything loud, everything hurried. You are drifting. Let the ziggurat recede behind you like a memory slipping underwater. Let the stars cradle you in their cold, ancient arms. And sleep.